Okay, we will call to order our committee of the whole meeting. Everyone, we're going to call to order our meeting. Sorry, we are starting a few minutes late today. We were just finishing up another meeting. So we'll start by recognizing today that we are holding our meeting on the unceded territories of the Sechot and Hoopachesit First Nations. We do have an agenda in front of us. Are there any late items to be added by councillors? Seeing none, any late items from staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have a late item, an email from Mr. Prost, and it's just with regards to painting and streets and sidewalks, etc. You have copies at your desk, I believe.
Great, we'll add that as item 2 under correspondence. And with that, would somebody like to move approval or agenda as amended?
Second, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Corbeil. All in favor? Carried. And we have minutes from the meeting held at 4 p.m. on January 24th and January 26th, 2022. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. So we'll go to delegations. And item number 1 from the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District, we have Terry Fong, Chief Financial Officer. And I know we have Daniel, our CAO, here as well.
Thank you, Twyla. Do I get control with this thing? Awesome. Okay. Oh, okay, fair enough. Thank you for the warning. Okay, so I'm Terry Fong. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District. With me today in the audience, I have Daniel Saylan, our new Chief Administrative Officer, and we're going to walk you through our 2022 to 2026 draft financial plan. Before we get into the details of the plan, just a reminder of what the purpose of a regional district is. So it is the local government for the electoral areas, and we provide basic services such as water systems and our volunteer fire departments to these electoral areas such as Bamfield and Long Beach. We are a regional service body that provides regional services such as our parks and airports. And then we also provide local government services across the entire region. And we work collaboratively in some cases with other regional districts, such as our 911 service. And kind of our unofficial role is that we lobby senior levels of government for issues that impact the entire region. And recently, I would say the active issues would be transportation, fisheries, and those items. So from the ACRD perspective, this is just a list of all of our services. Some are regional in nature, such as regional planning, and 911. There are some that are sub-regional, so have different combinations of participants, and those include our participation in the library from the electoral areas, solid waste management, which is done by Alberni Valley versus Bamfield, and then again there's some local services that are just for the electoral areas. So today's presentation will focus on those that the City of Port Alberni participates in. Our regional district has 6 electoral areas, 3 member municipalities, and 4 treaty First Nations. And we have 14 members, board members. The population was recently released. Sorry, it is a little small from here, but overall the population has increased by 8.2% across our region. And I think everyone will agree that things are just getting busier here, so it's important to remember that this was just as of May 2021, so I think those numbers will be increasing even more. Assessed values, I know this has been another hot topic across the region since released here at the beginning of January, but the assessed values across the entire region rose substantially. Long Beach, for example, went up by 44%. You've got the City of Port Alberni at your 38 or 39%. Thank you. And other areas such as Sprout Lake that again are at 42. So collectively overall we were about a 38% increase. Now we're not. Yeah. There we go. So our draft financial plan at a regional district level must create a plan for each service that we have. These services are independent. If you think of them as being siloed, we cannot transfer revenues or expenditures between services. And our allocation must include the allocation of staff time and salaries. We must be adopted by March 31st of each year. And we are not taxing authority, so we are requisitioning our funds either through the municipalities or through the province. And we don't have one mill rate, which I know is a common question, but we have a tax rate or a mill rate for each service. And then depending on what service each property participates in, it's a blended rate of all those. So similar to your process, we have our operational costs that we use when we consider how to build this financial plan. We are also in the process of implementing our very first ever strategic plan, which I'll touch on next. We have developed asset management plans for all of our services now and are trying to close those infrastructure gaps that exist. And our goal is to adopt a plan that includes the allocation of resources that will achieve those outcomes. I'm not going to go through this in detail. Welcome to load the slide presentation onto the website if you like, but I'll just touch on what our 5 focus areas are of our strategic plan. So the first one is the economy and COVID-19 recovery, and that includes things as enhancing agricultural development, our parks and trails, social procurement. Number 2 area is communications and engagement with community, including the hiring of a communications coordinator, which is a new program and initiative for the regional district. 3, management of new and existing infrastructure, including the implementation of our solid waste management plan. Emergency management, including response plans and coordination amongst all of our members. And finally, partnerships and alignments, including governance and service reviews and engaging with our community partners. So we took all that into consideration last year, as that was when we had first developed this plan, and we had a few resource requests, including some like centralizing of some services, such as our grant and asset management coordinator position. So although these were added in 2021, based on the timeline of them being added, we're really seeing the financial impact of these decisions this year. But we're seeing some great initiatives, such as our purchasing coordinator. So services that the City of Port Alberni participates in include the 911 service. So this service is a combination of Comox Valley, Nanaimo, Alberni, Clayoquot, Mount Waddington, Cathett, and Strathcona Regional District. So it is a corporation that runs these 911 services. Not a lot of changes this year besides their annual increases. However, last year they changed the formula of how we apportion costs just on a temporary basis for a trial. And it's now 50% based on population of these areas and 50% based on property assessments. So it'll be interesting as they're just digesting this information to see how these new census numbers impact our value. So I'm awaiting a report from them this week for that. From a general government services, really a strong focus on asset management, IT, records management, and then our health network is also through this. So last year, the highlights included managing the COVID impacts, the ever-changing COVID impacts to our ACRD operations, but we also run the wood stove exchange program, and we hired our new CIO. For 2022, the focus is really on getting the communications program up and running, and then with the new board going to be elected here in the fall, we'll do a board remuneration review with a committee this spring, and then followed by some orientation after the election. I'd say IT upgrades for things such as hybrid meetings continue to be a priority for us, and then making sure we're continuing to address the securities and vulnerabilities that are with IT and cyber protection at this time. We also have the credit union that's planning on moving out this summer, and we are, at this point, I think, planning on taking over that basement space as we have outgrown the upstairs area and are having many people working hybrid just because we don't have the office space for everybody. A couple things that I touched on earlier but are really kind of changing how we do business internally is the centralizing of our grant administration and procurement. So that kind of started in the fall, and we're really looking to see how that impacts our operations moving forward. And just a reminder, which I'm sure you guys have talked about as well, is that asset retirement obligations PSAB regulation is upcoming, and will have both financial and time impacts on the departments. From a regional parks perspective, we completed a parks asset management plan last year. We replaced the Platzer Creek Bridge on the Log Train Trail using some grant funding, and we developed a parks inspection and maintenance policy. This year, we're really hoping to get the West Coast multi-use path constructed. There's just less than 1 kilometer that is not done, and it would be great to make that a continuous trail, so we're looking for grant funding for that. Also doing some scoping for the Franklin River Bridge project to connect stage 2 and stage 3 of the inlet trail. And we'll continue to work with Mosaic and the province to improve accessibility for safe backcountry recreation. Regional planning. From a regional planning perspective, there has been a lot of activity in the agriculture area, and there have been very successful getting grants to fund these things. So they include expanding the connection with First Nations partners in regional food policy. They're developing an agricultural water supply, which is like a producer-led watershed monitoring framework. Great work being done, and lots of grants in that area, which is great. The Alberni Valley Aquatics facility, this is still on our work plan, and so we need to conduct a feasibility study as the Eco Center is nearing the end of its life. So we do have $100,000 in the plan to conduct this study, or at least get it started during this year. The Alberni Valley Emergency Program has really grown in the last couple of years and has become very active. So some of the highlights were we hired a protective services coordinator, we had a fire smart program, and then of course the changing COVID regulations were highlighted. And finally, we're undergoing and almost done an evacuation route plan for the Alberni Valley, which will be great. This year, after the evacuation route plan is done, we're going to update the emergency plan. We're also going to conduct a hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment for the whole region and continue our EOC training and developing some brochures and online materials for the program. The Regional Organics Project, we managed to implement phase 1, which was the City of Port Alberni, so that happened in September. And between September and December, we diverted 667 tons of organics, which was very exciting. So continued education coming up in 2022. And just a reminder that if you don't have it yet, the Sort and Go app is really the place to go to get all your information regarding your organics and recycling information. As well, in the Alberni Valley landfill, we are continuing to monitor with a partnership with VIU, our gas monitoring, and there has been a small amount of collection of methane gas. So we've installed we're going to install a gas flare at the landfill. The Alberni Valley Regional Airport, the construction is all done and we're operational now, so now it's kind of what are we doing for our next steps. So have a vision exercise that was done in 2021, and now we're looking at where we're moving forward with that. And I lost my ability to click. Thank you. Got it. And custom transit, mostly a regular year for custom transit. However, a couple of years ago, we talked about doing a regional transit study, which included discussions about maybe a bus to the other side. That kind of got put on hold from transit's end because of COVID. So that is on the books to begin later this spring, and it'll be led by BC Transit, but of course have significant input from staff, both at the regional district and at the city. And the Marine Patrol was hired last summer, but we weren't out on the boat just because of COVID regulations. So we're hoping to have a normal summer of being at the boat launch, in the schools, as well as on the lake. So that'll be great to have that back up and running at full steam. And finally, the Regional Hospital District is a separate legal entity, but has the exact same taxpayers, so I'll just touch on it at this time as well. So the West Coast General Hospital debt continues to retire. We're almost done all of it. And so the board last year started building a reserve fund so that we can have some money to offset the future construction of the new Tofino General Hospital. We're not sure when that's going to occur, but we know it's coming. It's near the top of Island Health's list. So it'll just give a little less borrowing to need to be incurred when that happens. And the other exciting thing that's been happening is the emergency room renovation. So they're hoping to have that. I'm not sure if they're going to complete it this year, but it'll be substantially complete anyways in 2022. And I also just added a chart to show you what the change, the average assessed value, residential property value in 2022 is about $470,000. And with that value, the regional district portion of the taxes will be about $230, an increase from $30 from last year. So just lines out all the services that the city pays into and gives you an idea of estimated taxation for the year. And Daniel and I are both happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry. Are there questions from council? Councillor Solda.
Hi, Terry. Haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Welcome. So my question is, I didn't see a breakdown what each region pays. You know, like Beaufort, the city, and how much they pay into. Do you have that broken down at all?
So each service is done, all of the services that the city pays are done by Land and Improvements. So we have a table such as this table, for each of the electoral areas for sure. I can send a link to our large 200 some odd page financial plan, but I don't have it off the top of my head, no.
Mm-hmm. It's just great because so the public knows, you know,
Yeah.
like, because they think the city pays it all or however anybody pays, right? So
Right.
it would be great to have that information. And I love the reserve fund for the hospital. I'm really glad it's nearly paid off. So that's a bonus there.
Yeah.
Also, for the airport, do you have what is owed for borrowing and how that's broken down? It would be really nice to see too.
For sure. So it was $6 million that we borrowed, and we borrowed it over 30 years, only about 5 years ago. So we are a ways till we pay it off, but we can definitely get, I can send over a report of where we're at with that.
Sure, I would like to see that. And
Yeah.
broken down for each area.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Terry, for your presentation. Just a question on, you mentioned the methane gas. I didn't quite catch that. Has VIU been doing any studies since we've been capturing the organics?
Yes, so the methane gas takes time to build over time. So there is a small concentrated pocket that we're going to address, and they're going to continue to monitor for us and kind of keep an eye on that. So because we're diverting the organics, we are fairly confident we're not going to have to install a full methane gas capture system. But there is occasionally pockets will kind of flare up, and that's what they'll find, and then we'll address with a flare. So it's not signifying that we're headed down a road of methane gas capture fully at this time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment on the regional transit initiative and the potential study that will go on with, led by BC Transit. I know this is something that the city's been asking for because we really regularly get requests from community members who want to be able to tie into the rest of the island's transit system, and specifically as we see more communities coming together, Ladysmith connecting to Cowichan and then connecting into the Nanaimo system, which goes to Parksville, and just noted that Comox Valley passed a resolution to start the process of looking to tie into that system as well. So in theory, it would go from Cowichan to Comox Valley, and likely then, of course, be looking for connections down to Victoria. So I think it's really an opportunity for us to not be a separate part of the island. It would be great, I think, if the province just led regional transit generally without us having to piecemeal it together. But as the rest of the island does connect together, I think there's just a natural opportunity for us to at least explore what it would look like. So glad to hear that work is going to begin hopefully this year. Mm-hmm. And just wondering if you could speak more to the pool and the new aquatic center and where the regional district is at. I've had a lot of questions because it was last year's budget, of course, that we allocated the $100,000, and we haven't seen that work begin yet. So if there's any update or more detail on what that process is going to look like, it would be great.
Sure. I'm going to let Daniel answer that if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. So we are putting together an RFP that's going to go out. We're hoping to see that go out in March. Part of the delay was my arrival and getting up to speed, but also the hiring of a communications person. And in this case, we really see the importance of communication across the region as being central to it. Even though we're planning on having a consultant lead the way, it's important to interface with our organization. We're also aware of the fact, as I'm learning, that you're doing a process of an OCP, and I do want to make sure that we coordinate so that questions and surveys and outreach doesn't overlap or trip on each other, that we want to make sure that we're fitting in hand in glove with each other's processes. But I think you'll be out first on the OCP, and then we'll be following on recreation, and we expect to see things starting to move in March.
Great, thank you very much for that update. Any other questions from council? Councillor Solta.
Just one more. The life of the landfill, what is it at now?
That's for you.
Sorry. And welcome, by the way.
So right now it has a closure date of like 2096, but we need a couple of years worth of the diversion rates from the organics to kind of get an idea. So the earliest would be 2096, hopefully substantially longer than that. So we'll be continuing to monitor that as we see what those diversions look like, probably over the next 2 years before we are comfortable making a statement of what our new closure will be.
Okay, and I noticed on here too, you don't have a breakdown of the increases in taxes for each area. Do you have that too? Is it possible? I mean, we see it all over line and everything, but I would love to see it in what it represents. Like if one is 10%, what does that mean in dollars for the city too? Like I'd like to know.
Yep.
In dollar wise, not percentage, if you can.
Definitely. Yeah, it's all in our financial plan, so I think I'll probably just send you a link to that with the page numbers that those are clearly, because there's a table for each one that shows not only the dollars, but the percentages and the average household impact that's anticipated, because of course the assessed values across our region are substantially different as well. So yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thanks so much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the community about regional district tax rates with some of the news that was out last week. So it always helps just to have more of an understanding of where our area breaks down and just understanding of the general regional district practices for the public.
Definitely.
So thanks for coming today.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we will move on to the Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce. We have the McLean Mill National Historic Site presentation, and we have in attendance Bill Collette.
Thank you very much. Yes, Bill Collette. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce, and with me here today is Terry Deacon, our President, and Anita Sutherland, who's our Director of Operations and Opportunities. She came up with that title, so it's a mouthful for me. So we're here today to present on the McLean Mill National Historic Site, our 5-year plan. So thank you, Council and Mayor, for welcoming us here today. I wanted to first mention that we're open, and it's through the last couple of years since we opened up our agreement with the city. It's obviously been a challenge for us, but we are open. We have been open. We've been committed to our staffing and to our attempts at meeting our objectives along the way. So we're open for business. We wanted to also mention that, or kind of go over some of the things that we do. Our main function at the McLean Mill site has been events. And as you know, events have really struggled over the past couple of years. So we really haven't done very many. But if you take a look at that picture, that's the kind of setting that we have and that we continue to look forward to for the future of the McLean Mill site. I wanted to just mention this phrase here, the road less traveled. That was a statement that was said at a conference I was at in late 2019, and it was made by the CEO of Alberni Valley Tourism during a tourism presentation, and he focused on the road less traveled, and it really impacted me because his His intent was to remind people that, yes, we have Tofino, yes, we have major attractions in Victoria and other larger places, but let's remember the road less traveled. And as he was talking, I got thinking McLean Mill, because that's where we are, is the road less traveled. And so we want to make sure that we continue to market and promote that wonderful site. There's a picture there of Anita, who again is our Director of Operations and Opportunities, and she's actually sitting on one of the e-bikes that we purchased in early 2021. Here's a picture just kind of showing what that site can look like. It's quite lovely, as you see, and that was taken earlier this year just in preparation for the Heritage Christmas Village that we did through the early part of December, but we actually prepared for it through all of November. It's a big task to get that organized. Events at McLean Mill are wide-ranging. We've really focused on weddings. That particular picture there is a wedding done. One of the first ones we did pre-chamber, this was back with the McLean Mill Society, a wedding held in September of that year of 2017. And really just kind of shows the type of, unique environment that we offer for wedding couples. Jeepers Creepers was another event, quite successful, 2017, 2018. Anita has run into somebody recently that it wants to help us recreate that kind of event for 2022, and we're quite looking forward to that. Other events, there's another wedding. That particular was taken in 2020. 2020 during the, the high times of the pandemic, but we were able to run a small wedding, and that particular picture was taken there. And the other one there is a picture taken during the paper chase run that we do every March, or most every March, and that goes through the site as well. So I'm showing those just to show you the wide-ranging types of events that we can do, community-focused events or specialized events such as weddings, corporate retreats, and that sort of thing. This is our team, or one of our groups, just before we were ready to welcome people during the Heritage Christmas Village. So you can see how many people we had, staff, volunteers. And again, that was one of 7 nights that we ran the event this past December. And just a wonderful event. Another phrase that I kind of like is people like to gather, and we like to gather people. And that's really how events are modeled for us, and they are the backbone of our business plan for the McLean Mill National Historic Site. So again, community events, small, medium, large scale, holidays, seasonal, that sort of thing. And I want to confirm that we did not come close to meeting our objectives for 2020 or 2021, and all due to the uncertainty surrounding ALR and COVID. Festival of Trees, this was part of the Heritage Christmas Village, and we were able to recreate that event that used to be held successfully here through to about 2015, and we connected with the former organizers of that event, Barb and Steve Kalugin, and they were kind enough to give us access to all the trees, connect us to the people at the BC Children's Hospital Foundation, and then of course we had good corporate support that enabled us to raise quite a bit of money, as you can see, just under $10,100 that we've paid off to the BC Children's Hospital Foundation, and they were thrilled with that, by the way. Food and beverage, that's another part of our business. We have a full commercial kitchen at the site. We have a large indoor dining area that can easily seat up to like 75 or 80 people during normal times. We have a lovely courtyard area and a 3-tiered deck. So we have lots of opportunity for food and beverage. And of course, again, because of the obstacles, it was stalled in both 2020, 2021. We did not meet our objectives. But the opportunities are endless. And I should point out that in, I don't think I have it on the slide here, but in 2017, the first year of the McLean Mill Society, food and beverage was a major part of the attempt that year. And they had about 40,000 in sales that year in food and beverage, and that was over about a 10-week period. We're focusing more on about a 30 weeks for food and beverage, so we know that there's lots of opportunity in that part of our business, and we're really excited about it. The campground, again, primarily in this case because of the ALR, we've opted to pull all campground marketing. We just don't do it. The RV portion, there's about 9 units or 9 sites there, 7 of which have full power and water to the site. And then there's nearby tenting opportunities. And we have a very good online booking system. And again, I credit Anita for that. She's very good at that kind of stuff and has really set us up nicely for online bookings and reservations and that sort of thing. But we did nothing in 2021. And we're looking forward to opportunity for 2022, if at all possible. That's kind of just a little Photoshop of the site for camping. The gift shop. So the gift shop was developed in 2020 during the shutdown when most places were closed. We were active out there at the site, completely gutted that building and recreated the gift shop, which we're now very, very proud of. And it just, it's done incredibly for us, especially when we consider the challenges surrounding COVID restrictions and that sort of thing. We maintain pretty good inventory levels of about $25,000. We focus on McLean Mill branded products, Port Alberni branded, Indigenous products and that sort of thing. And we really focus on island produced, and if not island produced, BC produced. So we're not buying from China and overseas. We're looking at locally produced articles, and we want to really brand and be proud of where we live. Shop local, shop online, mcleanmill.ca. And again, we're 24/7, and we're quite successful with that. Tours. Tours have been another hard one for us to get really off the ground, again, because of challenges with restrictions. But we did develop some localized tours at the site this year. We had 3 really dedicated volunteers, and all of our staff were trained on delivering them. And again, as I've mentioned in other presentations, we're really focused on community-wide tours that would be primarily operated by the Chamber itself, but connected at the hip with the McLean Mill site. So we're looking forward to redeveloping those in the coming weeks and months. This was a comment received from a community-wide tour, and it really kind of emphasized that we were on the right track. These people were looking for a tour of Port Alberni, and they had no idea how to do it. And this is a tour company, Wells Gray. And they were doing tours on their own here in Port Alberni without knowledge of Port Alberni. And when I brought them out to McLean Mill, the driver who'd been doing the tours in the past had no idea McLean Mill existed. And they were just thrilled with it. And as you can see, Annette wanted to share those comments with us. And then in 2021, we developed the bike seat program. And the word seat, socialize, exercise, adventure, and technology. And that was through a grant application that we successfully received. We bought 6 e-bikes. We used them primarily for seniors in the community or seniors visiting the site at no charge. But we see that as a future revenue opportunity for us. We own the bikes, and we can pretty much do as we please moving forward beyond April this year. We should have a little bit more freedom to develop a business around those e-bikes. And it's beautiful. As you know, traveling through that site, you can go for some nice long rides. Plus, we can take the bikes anywhere in the community, and just organize tours and that sort of thing. There it is. And now for the numbers. So this is a preliminary summary of 2021. The numbers aren't exactly accurate because they're about 3 weeks old now and bills keep coming in. So, but it's pretty close. Our total revenues were, as you can see, were 275, 233 for 2021. Our total expenses, 287. That includes about 16,000 in admin and other liability, much of which is not out-of-pocket expenses. So that covers myself, my office manager, and people helping out, for the McLean Mill side of things. So we actually show an unaudited loss of just over $12,000 for 2021. Again, I want to emphasize that our accountants will take a look at these numbers, and it could look a little bit different by the time you see our final report later this year. Moving forward, so this one here is focused on our hope that by the end of March, which is coming rapidly, that we have no further restrictions. And really where I'd like to see if council has any way to assist us with, in particular, the ALR matter. We are really struggling, putting it honestly, in terms of how the ALR is affecting our ability to market the site and maintain current bookings. We have lost, we had a meeting with staff about 4 weeks ago. We confirmed with city staff then that we'd lost, we'd had to give back deposits for 6 weddings. We're now up to 10. And another 5 weddings that are at risk or simply didn't book because of that ALR matter. So we're very honest with anybody coming in. They want to book the site, but we have to give them that caveat that we don't know if we can actually host you. It's very, very difficult, quite discouraging. So we really are hoping that council can help us somehow get that decision. That'll really help. But anyways, this report here shows where we think where we plan to be over the next 5 years, based on us, being able to market aggressively as of April 1st, and have no further COVID-19 restrictions in place, and a favorable ALR ruling. So you can see we are asking for 150 again this year, and then that declines to 2026 to $100,000 is what we're projecting moving forward. And this one here is if restrictions of either ALR and or COVID is still in place at the end of, or as of April 1st, but gone as of December 31st this year. So we're basically, if you look at the 2 slides comparative, this one here just kind of extends things yet another year for us. So, and you'll see that 2023, in both cases, we hope to be down to 140, but this one here, by 2026, we might not be quite where we would be otherwise. So that's just kind of how we're projecting it forward for your interest. And I think that pretty much summarizes it. Again, I want to emphasize it's all based on those current unknowns that we're challenged with. Overall, I'd like to confirm that I think we've done quite well, all things considered. Again, we've been open, we stayed open, we hired lots of staff, we've run what we could run based on restrictions in play at the given time. We've run weddings, and we've had other events. We've had celebrations of life and that sort of thing out there, and the feedback we've received has been exceptional. So I think we're on the right track, and but again, we are struggling with those particular challenges. I can answer any questions. Anita can. I'm sure Terry can if you've got any questions for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate the information. Are there questions from council? Councillor Corbeil and then Councillor Solda.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. And yeah, the ALR matter, I'd like to know what's going on with that as well. The one question I would have for you, you talked about the campsites, and I know where the tenting area was kind of got a little bit screwed up when the oil spill occurred. Has that been cleaned up? And if all of a sudden the light switch went off, we could have tenting there?
I believe so, yeah. I think the city did a great job with all of that oil spill stuff. That's well behind us, and we're ready to pitch a tent. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just add that we have been consistently and diligently following up with the ALR, and they just are not processing it yet. I mean, it just isn't getting to their decision makers yet. So we'll stay on top of it, and I'll ask Scott to follow up with them again this week. But yeah, they've been hearing from us regularly, and we just haven't made it to the top of their list yet.
Yeah.
Councillor Solda.
Well, the ALR was my big question too. So camping, just to go back to what you were saying, camping is not happening until we find out more information, ALR?
Well, we're reluctant to aggravate a situation, right?
Okay.
We know that there's questions out there, so we're being respectful of the political process, but in so doing, we are delaying what your goals are, which is to see lesser funding coming our way. So we're all in this together, and that's where we're at right now. So we don't market it. It's on our website, but you can't book a site.
Okay.
It's turned off.
Thank you. And the events, I believe on the ALR, there's so many events allowed per year. Is that in the books too? Are you following that rule? I think there's.
Well, yes, we are. We're doing as we understand we can do. We understand what ALR rules are surrounding events, but we are hoping to be able to operate outside of ALR restrictions. That's where we're trying to head, and so that's what we're doing. Again, though, we're very, very careful with marketing. We don't really, you don't find us in very many places marketing that site. And so again, the road less traveled, it's still less traveled.
Okay. I'm just a person, as you probably are aware, Bill, cart before the horse type of thing. I want to do it right this time, if we're going to do it, anything. And also the deposits for the wedding, you don't count that into your budget.
No.
Don't spend it because of the past experience.
Yeah. No, we're
Okay.
very, very financially responsible. The budgets are put in a suspense account and used. They basically are just held by us and then returned to the client. So there's never part of our revenue, the
Okay,
budget.
super.
And if I may, one thing I didn't touch on was the heritage fees and those things, heritage fees and donations. We collect those on behalf of the city, both at the McLean Mill and at the Visitor Center. We don't want to have two different prices for the same item, so we collect heritage fee at both locations.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for the answers.
Councillor Poon.
I'll just comment that I've been to the site several times over the past year, and with out-of-town guests, and they've always said they enjoyed the gift shop and the site itself. So, yeah, I think your team has done great. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll just echo that. I think that one thing we can all agree on is that the way the site is being cared for, maintained, marketed now is really how we want to see the site moving forward, and I think it's presenting our community in a really positive, professional way. So I have nothing but great things to say about the way that the site is being cared for. The gift shop is a great example. I attended a wedding there last summer and was just really impressed by the quality space that we're able to offer. So I think that your team has done a fantastic job of that. The only concern I think that I have is around seeing your food and beverage budgets and numbers. And I think that, I know you've had time in the food and beverage industry as well, and I'm sure you know for that reason that you can very easily lose money in that industry if you're not very, very diligent and very on top of things, and especially somewhere that is so seasonal. I just have concerns that, you know, your potential 29,500 in revenue up to 45, up to 60 is going to be eaten up by costs pretty easily. And is it a viable part of your business to run your own food and beverage operation there, or is this an opportunity where you should be looking for a contractor to just bring in a lease revenue? Because I think the potential for profit is very minimal, operating it in the way that you are.
Well, you know, first of all, we're not really operating it right now. So, you know, that's because of COVID challenges and that sort of thing. So we are open to various different proposals and suggestions. We have talked to local people and others, and got an email today from someone that wanted to do something out there for us, alongside us. So really, we're wide open to suggestions and opportunities. And yes, I do know the challenges in food and beverage, and we certainly won't position ourselves to lose money on it, but we see it as more of a service, you know. You're out there, people are kind of far removed from any sort of food opportunity, so we think we need to provide that service, and as long as we don't lose money, then, you know, then we're okay.
And totally recognizing that this year was a weird year, but it looks like you did lose money this year. Just, you know, really quickly looking at the high-level numbers that you provided. Anyways, I think that food and beverages have to be offered out there. I think you're absolutely right. It's a part of an experience, whether you profit or not. But I just wonder if you would be better to, you know, try to find someone in the community to run a service out there, where you make a very small amount of rent that you can rely on, rather than, you know, trying to run an operation that is very separate from the operation that you're running out there. I have concern that on a pretty, you know, light budget as it is, where, you know, you're really relying on the revenues that you're bringing in and the expenses being what you expect them to be, that'll be your area where you can really lose and blow your whole budget. And
I fully agree with you. You know, again, we're just looking at some of the opportunities, but you're right, and it is an area that we are considering strongly, and we toyed with it a bit last summer. We had local help last summer, helping us create sandwich products and that sort of thing. That was done locally by a third party, and so that is the path that we have already pursued a little bit. Willing to do it again.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your presentation today and for the work that you guys are doing out there.
All right.
We're really excited to see what the year comes, and hopefully we can have some certainty on the ALR issue sooner rather than later.
Sure, appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on today to unfinished business. Item number 1 from the City of Port Alberni 2022 to 2026 Financial Plan Bylaw 5045-2022. We have our Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chair Minions and committee members. So today we're just going to walk through the financial plan now that we have the financial plan in front of Council and the public. What we see today is the financial plan at first reading, and the only change that we see in this financial plan from the previous is the fire truck and the IRF contribution moving into 2023. So once again, the target date for the approval of the financial plan would be April 11th, and having a tax bylaw in front of Council at that time, and then that adoption in April 25th. With that, Council gave first reading on January 31st. Today we're at the Committee of the Whole, and we have some follow-up and some discussion opportunities that the committee would like to entertain. And then, of course, we have the public engagement component on March the 7th, and that's an e-town hall format, and similar to what we did back in 2020 before COVID hit, and we moved to the electronic meeting format. So we'll do that same format that we did in 2020 here in council chambers. And we must adopt the financial plan by May 12th, and the 15th lands on the weekend. So the requirement is to pass before May 12th, which is the Thursday before the weekend. And we are hoping that the committee would consider adding or recommending to council to add a committee of the whole on March 21st, and we'll focus in on tax rates at that time. Just with all the changes that we've seen in non-market change for the community and the increased values that we've seen, we would like to bring a little bit more detailed reporting and recommendations to council on the 21st. As you can see here, we've gone through 3 of the meetings so far as the timeline, and with the additional meeting that adds another committee of the whole on March the 21st, if that is agreed to by council. Some strategic priorities, just to give a quick overview again, we have the financial plan set, and a lot of the strategic priorities are within that financial plan that was brought from council in 2020. With that, we're trying to ensure that those priorities are met in the financial plan. In developing the plan, the financial plan, the first 4 years, of course, are the current plan from 2021 to 2025. And the 5th year is that inflationary increase for 2026. Some external forces are causing some increases in some of the expenses that we're seeing due to the shortage of supply and the demand on those supplies. And we still continue to look at ways to address the cost increases and still deliver the services that we need to deliver. The strategic plan is included, as mentioned, and we are maintaining the current levels of service as we have in the past few years. As mentioned, setting the tax rate, if we look back to 2021, we had a tax distribution with the residential accounting for 60%, 22.5 for the industrial, classes 4 and 5, and the commercial class 6 is 17.17%. Council can review these rates, and we are proposing bringing that forward on March the 21st. Within the 2022 financial plan, it is still the 4.97% increase for 2022 over the 2021 financial plan. Following years between 2023 and 2026 have about a 4.8% increase year over year. The residential and non-market change increased 2.24%, but overall the non-market change was just over 2% across all classes. So as we go through the financial plan, we'll look at section by section and review revenues and expenses and the different funds and capital projects. When it comes to revenue, once again, 4.97 is the tax rate that is in front of council. There are options that I'll discuss later as far as surplus, but right now we are looking at that 4.97% increase. Within the revenue section, the sales of service, which we see a significant change, is that curbside waste collection. Obviously, the change in level of service equates to that increase in the revenue within the solid waste. But once again, we are collecting fees that reflect the cost of providing that service. And that is one of the lower costs on the island when we look at island municipalities and regional districts. I believe the RDN is a little bit lower than the city of Port Alberni for that 3-stream service, but we are probably the second lowest on the island for that service. When it comes to Parks and Rec, we are looking at still a slow recovery from COVID. Obviously with the hesitation of the public to engage in activities and the restrictions that we have on those activities, we're not seeing the revenue that we saw in, let's say, 2019. So we're about $500,000 lower in this financial plan than we were in 2019 as far as revenues from the Parks and Rec services altogether. The building fees, we are seeing a significant increase in the building permit fees, and that's supporting the resources that we need to have in place to support development and building within the community. So we're able to add resources and cover those through the building permit fees that we see in that service. The COVID Restart grant funding is fully allocated, and we need council to support that allocation, and later on I'll review in some of the categories as far as that allocation. When it comes to the expenses overall, the QP collective agreement has a 2% lift year over year. The exempt is based on the CPI per policy, and that is a 2.8% increase. When it comes to the expenses, depending on what they are, they're a 1 or 3% inflationary increase for each line item, or we are seeing the averages that we've noted in the past few years as far as expenses. So that's an overview of all expenses across the entire general fund. When it comes to government services, as mentioned by Terry Fong at the ACRD, the asset retirement obligations is a new accounting standard that we have to make sure that we have in place for 2023. There's some consulting work that we need to do as far as the retirement of our buildings and some lease and contract requirements at the end of that, at the end of those leases that become a liability to the city once those are complete. And a staff resource for procurement and supporting the payable function in finance account for the increases in the finance year over year. When it comes to information systems, I think I've mentioned this last year and this year, it's where we have the ability to allocate the cost based on what drives that cost. So if fire or building need a certain software, those costs will land within that service. So it's more reflective of that service that's being provided, and that supports the recovery of costs. If we have building, or even with our software for our solid waste, that allows us to build the costs into providing that service and the revenue that we require to cover that service. City Hall and general government, we saw the restaining of the siding that will see a drop in the City Hall costs for this year. Election, of course, happens every 4 years, and this year we have the election within the cost for general government services. And training. The training budget was reduced in 2020 and 2021 for the employees, and with that, we see that return to the full funding with inflationary increases year over year, going back to what we saw in 2019. So we're back at what we normally would see in 2022 for the training and development of staff. And whereas the elected officials, the training and travel, those expenses returned to full last year on the anticipation that we would see things return back to normal. But obviously we underspent in that line item, but we still have that at 100% of what we anticipated based on the inflationary increases from 2019. And when it comes to insurance, there is a component that would be associated with our water and sewer funds. And with that, those insurance costs are now within water and sewer. Another example of us taking those costs that are in those service areas and making sure that they are in with that cost line item. So water and sewer are separate funds from our general services, and that now is within insurance. So you'll see it goes down, but in fact, we are still approximately the same cost as we had for insurance in the prior year. It's just in the different funds. Moving on to protective services, the contract with the Rcmp has obviously been negotiated, and we do understand that there has been a increase greater than they anticipated for the contract. We were advised at a 2.5% to save, and we would have that covered through our emergency reserve, which we take the surplus from every year and put aside up to a $2 million maximum. With that, we'll talk a little bit later about maybe a contribution from the surplus this year to cover some costs from liability, but I'll address that later. Administration, we've seen an increase in cost for administration because of the duties that have been assumed by administrative staff, changes due to COVID, because of how prisoners are handled, and the importance of having coverage for those positions at the administrative side of the Rcmp service. And of course, we use the community policing through the emergency reserve every year, and the costs that we've seen in the past few years now reflect what we budgeted. So if you notice, in I think it was 2020, we were about $250,000 for that service, and currently it's about $190,000 for community policing. But that all comes from the surplus that we achieve in the Rcmp contract with the underutilized positions. When it comes to fire, at our last council meeting, we had the increase due to the fire truck. Of course, that is now reflective in 2023 when we receive that unit, and you'll see that in the financial plan. It's about $105,000 in the IRF every year for that increased cost over what we currently pay. When it comes to building inspection, we've added resources, and we've seen an increase in the amount that we see for building inspection. And of course, that's 2 building inspectors, and rather than the one that we had in 2021 for budget. Transportation services. So this is all our roads and maintenance. It's aligning with our actuals and the focus on the operational needs of the service. There is a staff resource that was fully realized this past year and continuing on. So our positions with the superintendents and manager of operations are now in place. So we see the increased cost for those positions. Also with public transit, there was a restart grant that continues for the first 3 months of 2022. That's approximately $32,000, and that supports the restart of the transit service that the federal government provided to BC Transit. In the budget, there's a ridership recovery of 85%, so we anticipate the following year returning back to normal and normal costs and normal revenues. We've done a little bit better than expected on BC Transit, and I think we're about 3% ahead of what they anticipated the city of Port Alberni to be as far as ridership. When it comes to snow removal, that was something that was a little of a challenge this past year. But when we look at the actual costs that were incurred and the averages, we were just over by about $5,400. And it's due to timing. So just because the snow hit at Christmas time and the overtime, we have some expenses that came into this year. So we're a little bit higher than we normally at the start of the year. But when we look back at the averages, I think we budgeted about $197,000 for the last 5 years, and we expend about $167,000 per year. So when we look at averages, we're within range, and I think we'll see how things go. But we didn't put any extra into the snow removal line item because we are relying on those averages year over year. We do have contingency if there is an issue at year to year, and like I said, it was just slightly over budget for 2021. And with the operational focus, we're seeing more work done within that operational component. We've seen in the past where capital was done by our city staff, and that might be shifted over to our capital costs. But now we are looking at that operational focus as far as costs within the transportation services. As mentioned, fees cover expenses in 2022 for solid waste. We do have an additional resource for that's covered with those fees and charges, and there's no increase for that plan from what we originally put in place for the 180 for the standard curbside collection service, that 3-stream. And noting that there hasn't been an increase since 2012 for our solid waste services. So, 9 years, we have not seen an increase in solid waste services, but we do incur fees and we incur charges that were about $135 per service. So that was covered by taxation. Moving forward, the fees that are incurred are covered by the revenue that we see for the solid waste service. So some early successes that we've seen, obviously with the diversion and mentioned earlier in the meeting from the ACRD, we are diverting waste, and I think it surprised me, to be honest. I think the community has done a great job. Of course, there's always challenges with change, but really impressed with how the public's gotten behind this, and in general, most people are participating as they should. And once again, lowest cost, one of the lower cost items as far as the island, as far as organics and recycling and garbage all in one. When it comes to development services, the resource for the manager planning, that's going to be in the financial plan this year. Once again, the development services is enabled to cover the costs of these positions based on the revenues that we're seeing because of the increase in building within planning and development. The OCP started late this past year, and we anticipate that to be complete in 2022, so we'll carry forward anything that we've assigned for that project. And we've included funding in the plan for SOMAS and some of the consulting and work that we need to do over the next 2 years, and that's at $200,000 per year in 2022 and 2023. Parks and Rec, as mentioned, COVID definitely had quite an impact on our revenue and some increases in our expenses. As we return to normal operations, you're going to see line items increase greater than they were in the past few years, but returning to what they would have been if we were in normal circumstances in 2019. With that, the parks and maintenance, that we do have some assets that we need to address, and we are ensuring that we have that new position that was assigned in 2021, that is going to be filled in 2022 for parks maintenance. That was in the budget, so there was no increase, but we'll utilize those funds in 2022 now. And of course, the trees, it's a strategic priority of council, and we see that move to the capital plan and no longer in an operational expense. So we weren't able to plant the trees in 2021, so we planted those trees already in 2022. So we just need to carry that forward from 2021. With our capital plan, taxation accounts for just under $1 million in our capital works in 2022. Some of the things that we are looking at are the software improvements. So with our accounting software, we had a planned replacement or renewal of that software in 2023, but we pushed that back because the service is now supported until 2032. So we'd like to do some improvements as far as reporting and our structure as far as caseware. So we have some improvements in the plan for $50,000 to do some consulting work to improve those reporting processes. With the ERP, the equipment, we are seeing some increases in some of the equipment replacement. Roads, storm, and water and sewer often go hand in hand with replacement. If you note in the financial plan, we've included the past year's projects that are incomplete and are in work in progress. So those are now sitting there for council and the public to review as far as plans for the upcoming year. And then, of course, the new projects so that we have in the financial plan. But all that said, we are looking at just under $1 million in capital works from taxation. So when it comes to carry forwards, we've identified the official community plan, and there was some expenditures at the end of the year, but not a lot of expenditure. But we'll refine that number and carry forward what has been assigned for the 2022 year. The parks plan is something that was contemplated in Parks and Rec admin, and we're carrying that forward to be associated with just some of the work that's being completed with the OCP. As mentioned, trees are being brought forward, and those have been expended in early 2022. When it comes to facilities, we do have some funding that was unspent in Parks and Rec and Min. And the Director of Parks and Rec and Heritage and myself have looked at the ongoing plans for renewal within our facilities. And I think it's important that we take the time to identify all the needs of our facilities, whether it's the Works Yard or the Parks Yard or it's Glenwood. We have significant expenses that are anticipated with these buildings. And going back to the asset management needs of the community and all our infrastructure, it's important that we have a good understanding of our facilities and what we need to do with them, so that council has the ability to take that information and come up with a plan and not piecemeal things together. And I think, you know, we'll bring things forward, but I think we need to show council the entire plan for our facilities, and then the business case on how we go about doing that. So that is an ask that has not been in front of council, but I think just looking at our long-term plan for facilities, it's important that we take that time and look what we need. So that is a request that we're asking council to consider from the 2021 surplus component. Bridge maintenance, there was a plan to use a contractor to do some repair work in I believe it was 2020, and at that time we had $200,000 assigned for that work, understanding that it wasn't a capital in nature project, and it wasn't going to be that amount. So we had a quote, and we planned to get that work in 2021 done, but it hadn't been complete, so we're asking to bring forward that $55,000 for that work. We had some consulting work that was planned for some strategic work done at the SOMAS that Economic Development had, and we're carrying forward $22,000 for that. And when it comes to the surplus allocation, this is where I'd like to see where the committee would like to go and maybe make a recommendation to council as far as the allocation of that surplus. I think we have the ability to use some of those funds that are in surplus to replenish some of our reserves, or look at tax mitigation as far as projects. And instead of using the $950,000, could we use some of that surplus for reduction of taxation, but still accomplish that capital work that we need to do. And just in terms of the COVID Restart Grant, and we can break this down a little bit more when we bring the report to council next week, but the Parks and Rec service, obviously, we've seen a significant drop in revenue in that area over the last 3 years, or 2 years, plus we anticipate another $500,000 of COVID funds being used if council supports it in 2022, because we're not realizing the ability to have that revenue in the certain circumstances as we see right now. When it comes to community gaming, we made some commitments to McLean's Mill and the Chamber and some of the other items that are in the financial plan for those gaming funds. And based on where we currently sit, we're about $231,000 or $232,000 under what we anticipated in 2021. Connectivity upgrades, so that is improving our software as far as online payments for dog, businesses, e-commerce, something that we noticed that was difficulties when people were trying to pay the city or deal with the city, and that's one of the purposes of the COVID restart, is to have that connectivity. We also have the council chambers, that's included in that 276, just improving that and our committee room. So all wrapped up, it's about $276,000 for that. When it comes to policing and the administrative of that service, over the past couple of years, we've seen that increase in cost and admin, and not all of it is associated with the COVID response, but we were probably about $500,000, and reasonably we are recommending that council support a contribution to the policing service for those COVID funds, just because the operational demands over the past 2 years. Some safety improvements for ventilation at the fire hall is included in that $15,000. And direct costs in 2021 that is associated with COVID is the wages that we pay, the Zoom licensing, anything that is associated with the direct costs that are incurred and billed to the COVID project number. So those are sitting at $122,000 for the year. So, and all total, that accounts for the remaining funds from the COVID Restart Grant for 2021, with the commitments made for 2022, if council supports that. And with the water and sewer, that's one thing I didn't include there. We are continuing to see those costs, those reserves being replenished with the fees that we receive for those services, and right now we are sitting at I think about a 4% increase for water and sewer, and we've noticed that there's been some lower revenues in water because of some improvements that are made on some of our larger users. So they're recognizing that the waste of water has been lowered. So now we're looking at lower revenues in water just because of some of the improvements that some of our larger users have made. So with that, I'll hand it over to the committee and Chair Minions if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for that report. Are there questions from council? Councillor Solda. And then Councillor
I
Corgill.
thought maybe somebody else wanted to start. So on sidewalks, I don't see a line item for sidewalks. I see roads and stuff like that, but there's nothing about sidewalks and in the budget. So is there normally a line item, or how is that sidewalks put in? Because we have a lot of issues with some sidewalks, so I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah, so with that, keep on forgetting we're in the committee of the whole. Committee member Solda. What we are looking at is we do have line items, and there is sidewalk work.
Am I missing it? I must be.
It's not specifically, but roads and maintenance. So there is a component. So our work orders include, or our project numbers include the sidewalk maintenance, and there is some expenditure. And I can bring forward what was expended this past year if council would, or if the committee would like to see that. But it is included in the financial plan, and there is a plan to do some work.
Okay, so do you have a line number for that? And also, I remember asking what the budget was for sidewalks last time. What did we spend and how much we did? You know, because how much, I know, like, this much cement might cost, or however it might cost $50,000, but I'm just throwing that number, that I know it's not that. But I would like more information on that.
I think it would be great if we could get an idea of what is typically expended on sidewalk maintenance versus new sidewalks. I know typically we would have a capital line for new sidewalks, so that's probably more easy to see exactly what we're spending. But maybe out of the roads and maintenance budget, if we could get an understanding of what is typically spent on sidewalk improvement, that would clarify a lot of the questions.
Exactly. We used to have where engineering or the works would come and explain all that to us, so that would be really handy to have. And the line item where the sidewalks would be in, like existing sidewalks, exactly. What else okay. And I sent a text to our acting CAO regarding the bike lanes and that, the paint. Well, that's the big thing. I mean, we're seeing more and more people talk about it. You drive down through the mill, and I've said this before, you drive at night, and oh my God, if I was a tourist, I would think it was just a single lane because you can't see no lines. So I'm kind of curious to know about the painting, if the, is it different for crosswalks, the bike lanes and stuff like that? Do we use different paints? And, you know, it's really frustrating for the public because the side roads, they can't see. I get more and more complaints this weekend about our line painting and what's happening there. Is it going to be all in one? Let's just get the painting done. I know it's not it's sort of a budget item, but
I think
It's frustrating, I'm
I think
frustrated
the
on
question
it.
I'm hearing is this an area where we need to increase our budget?
I
If
think
we're
we
not
do.
meeting the service that we are hoping we are, or is it just a matter of supplies and we'll get caught up this year?
Yeah, it's really frustrating, because that's all I hear about is our line painting, Madam Mayor. And, yeah, so anyways, the other one is,
Can,
oh, sorry.
Chair Minions, I wouldn't mind just answering that one, because I did prepare for that, and
Okay,
I did reach out to
Sorry.
engineering services just to confirm, because, you know, to be honest, I'm at, you know, at the grocery store, and someone did ask me what's going on with the line painting too, so.
oh, you're getting it.
So I'm getting it also, so. But, so last year, we were informed by our previous contractor that the paint supply would be an issue. And they would not be able to freshen up our road lines last year. So, you know, late in the year, we were trying to find another supplier for that service. But, you know, they weren't able even to provide us with the thermoplastic crosswalk and stop bar marking that our crews do. So it was really a paint supply shortage in Texas that caused that. And that was widespread. So, you know, we were challenged with getting that work done. But, you know, as mentioned, we did get a supplier for this service in late 2021. And we, you know, they are a large scale road painting contractor that would be able to do and provide some line work, dependent on the weather, of course. But towards the end of the year, we didn't get the right conditions to do that work. So obviously, we didn't undertake the work that we needed to do last year. And we know that, and we're trying to get that done early in spring, as soon as possible. But look at, you know, as being a larger contractor, they might have different solutions for us to address the needs that we're identifying. But obviously, you know, if we had these lines painted in 2021, we might not have been having that feedback we're getting from the public. So they're going to look at the arterial roads and the collector roads first and get those repainted. And then the remainder of the roads that we need to undertake by the end of summer. The contractor has indicated that they're going to provide us with a higher quality product, which is better reflective, has better reflective characteristics, and produces results more efficiently than using with the modern technology and equipment. So there's been a change, and it's an environmental change, and I understood this happened probably about, maybe 8 to 10 years ago, but they removed the lead from the paint, and that made it reflective. So obviously, you know, the harm that it does to the environment, they removed that out. So we're also looking at cat's eyes in our darker roads to support that. And just looking at our public works group, they've secured the supplies that they need to do the crosswalks and have enough paint to do those services that we normally do. So our intent is to get this done in 2022 and catch up on the work that needed to be done in 2021.
Do we have enough in the budget for that? Has that been allocated?
It's been allocated. We have a budget for line painting. We didn't use it all this past year, and we plan on using it all this year.
Okay, and I just have
Could I just ask a follow-up to that? We had a few carry forward items left over in the budget. Is that being carried forward into improvements this year, or is it just going into the surplus, the last year's line painting budget?
Chair Minions, there hasn't been anything identified, but I will follow up with engineering to make sure if we need a few extra dollars to get all the work done that needs to be done, we'll do that.
Thank you.
and I'm just worried about, you know, we purchased the paint and that, but the thing is, the cost of the inflation rate is just going up, and costs are going up. So I would like to see that just added on top of the budget, because I want to make sure we have money and not come back and say, hey, we don't have enough money. So, I mean, if the money's there, let's pump it and let's get these lines and crosswalks. The safety is important. The next one is $88,000 to renovate the fire hall, and this is not my question, but I forgot about the $88,000 to renovate. And when I was on council in the past, we had a seismic upgrade, and the way the roof is peaked, the concern is why are we spending so much? And I know it's to do with the fire truck, but maybe that can be explained.
Yeah, and I know that that's a prior year budget that was set. I'll just add to this concern that that budget actually came to us in, I think, 18, and it was the same budget amount. So I think the concern is, and we did ask this at the last meeting when we made the commitment to the fire truck, has that budget been really looked at to make sure it's going to be sufficient, especially with the cost of construction right now? If the budget hasn't changed over the last few years, has the scope of work been reduced, and are we confident in that number?
Chairman Higgins, I think that's a good point. I will bring that up with the fire chief, but at this time there hasn't been any request for increased funding for scope or cost escalation, and I'll confirm the reason why.
So do you know if there's engineering plans? I mean, suddenly an engineer is called and plans are made up and they went, oops, like, is there plans made already? Do we know if there was anything done?
Councillor Solda, what I'll do is I will follow
I'm sorry.
No, not a problem. I will follow up with the chief and make sure that we have an answer for your engineering concern, and making sure that it doesn't have any impact on the seismic.
Because I think that will give us more of an accurate dollar, wouldn't it? Engineering plans on that. And also looking at the budget too, the capital projects for the Maclean's Mill. Am I reading right or am I reading wrong? There is some capital projects, or is that the past
So
for Maclean's?
yeah, Councillor Solda, what I'd like to look is maybe you're looking at the past projects or the current projects?
The current.
So with the current projects, and I believe that's the $120,000, those funds come from the $30,000 that the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District contributes for that work. So that's the historical component of the Maclean's Mill.
Okay.
We also apply for a grant to the federal government for that. That's $60,000, and we contribute $30,000. So in total, we have $120,000 to address the historical component of Maclean's Mill in the capital projects.
And could you clarify what this year's projects will be? Because I know that's the ongoing funding amount that we have for capital at Maclean Mill, but we haven't heard yet what specific projects will be worked on.
Chairman Higgins, I don't have that right now. What happens is there is a listing. We've done a study on what is required at the site, and our manager of facilities has that listing, and he would take that and do it in the priority sequence. But if we can look at the 2022, and we do have some catch up to do from 2021, but we can bring that forward.
And a couple more things. The gaming revenue, I'm really concerned about that because we haven't received, we don't know what it's going to be. I don't think they're up in full speed either at the gaming center. So I don't like to have projections if we're not sure, because look what the last 2 years have been, and that's a concern. And I know there's money that you had mentioned, Madam Mayor, but I'm concerned about the projections on the gaming, on that. So that's my biggest thing. My biggest one is, like the government has just announced that they're looking at raising minimum wage again to like a 5.1%, probably, depends on the inflation rate in June, I think it is, June 1st. And that's going to be a big thing for the community, and that just brings up everything. So I don't know if we've looked at that. And also at the report, you were going to mention about the, the cameras for the, I'm going to a next topic, I'm like that. So, I'm going to the Rcmp now regarding that. You were going to bring up about the cameras for the vests, and I believe we're going to have a cost probably. We're going to be a project.
So,
Go ahead, Andrew.
Councillor Solda, I'll address the gaming first.
I know, I'm like that.
Oh, that's all good. It's all good. So with the gaming, what we saw in the last quarter, we did see a payment that was more reflective of what we normally see. So, you know, that indicates to me that we might be very close to what we are receiving. So I know they're open. I know they're conducting business as they can in COVID, and we are seeing things open up. So I'm optimistic that the gaming revenues might be at the level that we expected to see in a normal year. Okay. So, and then just with the, sorry, what was the other one?
Rcmp.
Rcmp, body cameras, thank you. So with the body cameras, when I talked to E-Division, it was anticipated that they are doing an RFP, so the cost isn't known right now. So they're doing some pilot projects, but what they will do is formulate those costs, and they are likely to land in 2024, 2025 budget.
Okay.
Okay, so unknown at this time. We know it's going to cost. They did some estimates, and really just, I think it was important that they noted that let's do the RFP and then we can firm up that number, because those numbers are kind of dated based on what the plans were a couple years ago. They're updating that with an RFP coming out very soon.
Okay, I'm glad you can keep up with me, because nobody else does at work, because I'm all over. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Corbeil.
I'll be a little bit shorter. Andrew, if you could provide some clarity when you talked about the $382,000, the 2021 surplus, and for example, the bridge maintenance was $55,000. So are you saying then that that money, there is no maintenance necessary for a bridge, and in fact, that money could go towards lowering taxes? Is that the gist of what you were saying?
Sorry, Councillor Corbeil, if that's what I indicated, made it seem like. I didn't mean to indicate that. What I meant to say was that we have maintenance work that's required on these bridges, and engineering has identified and had a quote for the work for a company that does that work, and it's about $55,000 that we need to expend in 2022. We just didn't undertake it in 2021 because of just the timing and getting that work quoted.
So there's actual work that needs to be done?
There is, and it was identified, as mentioned, that would be much more than that, but the prior Director of Engineering worked with Main Road, and they do that work, and then they have the ability to do that within the time frames that we need to get them to do the work. So.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I have, we've applied for funding or for a grant for the Key to Key. We don't know if we're going to be successful. If in fact we were successful, could that change? I think we've got $200,000 out of the operational budget applied to the Key to Key. Would that change if we were successful in obtaining that grant?
Councillor Corbeil, with the grant, we made an application, and our components, our contribution is that $200,000. So we have that over the next 3 years. Where we have the surplus, council could look at using that surplus for that or another capital project if council so desires. So if the committee makes a recommendation to look at reducing the taxation component or using that funds to supplement a reserve that we might be taking money from, that's council, that could be the committee's recommendation to council.
So the $200,000 was a requirement for applying for the grant? Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is all. That's the entire component for that. So that was I think it was a $2.5 million grant application, with the remainder coming from the city. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Poon, any questions? Okay. Councillor Solda.
Sorry, I had to look back on my notes. Going back to roads. I don't know why it's my favorite topic this year, but regarding roads, I'm looking at the budget here and maybe I'm in the wrong place here, but paving and road construction's the amount. And also, then we got paving and road construction on the following page, and it talks about capital designs, no, right there and right here. Okay, so we're in 2022. Okay, I'm in the wrong date. It's because I don't think we're doing a lot for our roads anyways, and let's just get out of this part here. Some of the roads are in really sad shape, so I'm hoping that we allocate a lot more lately in our budget. What is our total budget? It's not in front of me here, for our roads. And like Beaver Creek, for example, they're filling the roads with stones because that's what Main Road's doing. And I'm I just want to know what our budget is for the roads, if you can get me that, and how many, what is it, meters that, how much roads do we get out of that for paving? Sorry. I thought I was looking at the right one, but I'm not looking at the right one. Yeah. Thank you.
So, well, Councillor Solda, we'll bring forward some information on our plans, including what's planned in prior years, because a lot of the projects that we have in prior years for capital, those include a component for those road renewals where we dig up the road. Where we dig up the road for capital projects, we do have a replacement at that time. So,
Well, I understand that part of it. It's just, in the past, I used to be able to see how much roads we've done and how much we've spent, and it's just different. So I'd like to see more of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think generally when we're talking about our capital projects, it's really helpful, and I appreciate having the prior year funded but not completed projects included as part of the budget. And although we haven't been able to get to some of those projects, and certainly we all, hope that we are able to get to more going forward, I think it's really important that we have those funds set aside and that those projects are scheduled to be done. It's almost like a savings account, a reserve fund savings for our roads. If we aren't able to get to the work, at least we have the money there to get to it as soon as we can when the roads need to be done. I think, though, that this really brings up the topic of asset management, and where we've done a really great job, in my opinion, with our sewer and water systems, where we know what the maintenance cost is, we know what the renewal cost is, we know what the lifespan of all of our assets are, and we've been able to set our fees at a level that is going to make that a sustainable system. We haven't been able to do that with our facilities. I know that's been talked about today already. We haven't been able to do it with our roads. And I think that we really need to get serious about finishing the asset management plans that I know your office would really like to work on. So my question is I know that we have in the past talked about an asset management specific staff person or resource of some type. Is that included in the budget, or is it something we need to consider adding?
yeah. So, Councillor Chair Minions, with the asset management, we had a plan to use the resource from the Alberni Clayoquot Regional District. So they had an asset management professional that took their plan and did the work, but unfortunately it didn't work out due to a vacancy, and then subsequently that person has left the organization. So we're kind of back to the drawing board as far as what we need to do. We do have funding in the capital plan for that consulting work, for the asset management plan and implementation of that. So that's still sitting there. As far as last year's allocation, it's about $45,000. So as we go through the financial planning process and we look at alternatives, we can bring something forward to council, but at this time, obviously with finance in the thick of the audit, in the thick of the financial plan preparation, we wouldn't have the resources to dedicate to get that person started. So we're kind of hitting pause, and we do have that funding available to use, and we'll bring forward a recommendation to council just how we can address that, because it is one of the most important things that we need to do.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know we hear Councillor Solda ask for, how many kilometers or meters of road are we doing? And I think while that number is helpful, and I do remember that Guy Sisson used to bring us that number every year, and it's certainly informative to see. I typically look at, what are we, this year's budget, next year's budget, previous year's budget, what are we, I kind of pick out the paving projects and other types of specific projects, and just to look generally at, are we going up or are we going down at our infrastructure funding? But it all is very high level and really just guesswork without that plan. So I know that your department has asked for more resources in that for getting asset management completed and really just surveying what we have and making sure that we are working on a sustainable front. And I think that we have a council that really wants to support that work. And some of the questions that we hear are because we don't have that information. And so we're just trying to get an understanding of if we're spending enough or not. And it's really hard to know, obviously, without that plan. So I'll certainly be interested to know as we go through this process, are there additional resources that you feel need to be allocated for us to be able to get that work done this year, recognizing that it wouldn't be starting, in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
And just wanted to comment as well on, I wasn't completely clear on the slide that showed the surpluses from prior years.
Yeah.
There was a parks plan, and then there was money for facilities as well. I know that parks and facilities are separate, but in our budgets, they are occasionally lumped together. Is that a specific parks master plan and then asset management around facilities, or just some work around facilities?
Yeah, so I'll let Twyla bring it back up. So with the understanding that we'd be going through the OCP, the Director of Parks Heritage and Parks Recreation Heritage identified that it would be good to have an overall parks plan to identify the parks within the community, their purpose, and what level of service that we would have at each park, whether it's the playground or just an open park. So we need to consolidate and have a overall plan for our parks, and that will help us understand what services we need as far as staff time and resources to address that park, depending on where it is, and get that in front of council so that we can make some decisions on the parks within the community. So the intent of that was to have that in the administrative and undertake that at the same time we're doing the OCP. So that was something that was planned in the administrative component. The facilities was a discussion point, and I'll bring the Glenwood Centre as the example. We had a placeholder for $250,000 for Glenwood Centre, and with that, I don't think council had a plan for that, but we had that in the financial plan, and there wasn't that commitment for it. We know that there's boiler needs, there's washroom needs. I mean, that washroom hasn't changed from day one, from what I recall, and there's a lot of components of that. I think, you know, I was doing lip syncing back in the 80s when I was a kid. The paint has been the same, and the characters are the same on the walls. So there hasn't been a lot of work done in that facility, but that hasn't been brought forward to council. And that brought us down the path of saying, well, what do we need to do? What does council need to make some decisions? Because by all means, you know, our manager of facilities is ready to do all these upgrades, but we need that council-approved plan, and we'd like to do that, and that's why we have $50,000 identified in the financial plan. We also need to do the asset retirement obligations, so that goes hand in hand, and that's a financial requirement for 2023. But we're also doing appraisals in 2022 for our buildings for our insurance purposes. So if we can wrap that all together, bring forward something for council to consider in the 2023 and a long-term plan for all facilities, and that's where we make our decisions on where we need to invest, whether it's at the Public Works building where we need new boilers or just an improvement of the space, or what is the business case to move on with something else possibly. So I know that was something that we brought forward to council in a one-off in 2020, but I think it's important that we understand the needs of all our facilities and what are the needs of the community. So I think if we have that facility review and what's required for our buildings that are 50 to 60 years old, then council can make some decisions on where they need to allocate those funds and set the priorities.
Thank you, and really appreciate that, and would like council to have the opportunity to, or would like that plan to be done and council to have the opportunity to review and approve it. I think it stops us from having potential issues where council sees work being done that we don't feel like we approved or didn't know was going to be undertaken. And I go back to a city facility being painted, and where paint you would think is maintenance and would just be a part of, you know, a standard maintenance budget. In this situation, the color was changed, and spaces that were concrete were painted over, which creates, of course, you know, more future maintenance. And it happened to start about a month after council took $800,000 out of our budget right at the beginning of COVID. And I think that was a learning experience for council and staff, where council felt very much like that was maybe a nice to have, but not a need to have at a time when we had pulled a lot out of our budget and then all of a sudden seen that work being done. I think that, you know, it was well intentioned for sure, and it's an old situation that we certainly don't need to dwell on, but I think having that plan would really avoid situations like that happening in the future. I would love to see updates to Glenwood, and although I have to say I'm just amazed at how our staff maintain that building. I have never seen bathrooms that so clearly came, you know, maybe out of the 60s, but look to be in such perfect condition. We really do a fantastic job of maintaining and upkeeping that building, but it certainly does need some updates, and we have a few other facilities that are in similar situations. So I think that would be a really helpful document to have, and again, just on that asset management of greater scheme, you know, understanding what the requirements are moving forward and then costing appropriately. And just on the carry forward generally, since Councillor Corbeil had a question about it as well, if I'm understanding correctly, typically, so we have $382,000 of funds that, you know, would be surplus, but in this case are being carried forward as future specific, or projects that are specifically going to be undertaken or proposed to be undertaken this year, rather than just put into the general surplus. So could we have some information on the economic development consulting $22,000 and what that is for?
Okay. So what we have is a plan to do some strategic planning on the SOMAS site. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have about this slide. Are there any other questions from council on this? Okay. Council training and travel is one that I keep kind of struggling with being at full 100% of what we typically budget. I guess, is there an update on if our conferences are scheduled to be in person this year? FCM, okay. Oh. Okay, thank you. So it sounds like our conferences are back on, which is exciting. We've certainly missed that over the last couple of years, the opportunity to network with other communities and see what's going on. And then I guess just my last question would be around surplus allocation. I believe typically our surplus just goes into general reserve, you know, any funds obviously outside of these ones. I know we don't have necessarily a specific amount for the surplus yet, but is there, if council wanted to reduce our financial plan increase without actually obviously drawing down projects, is there a portion of the surplus that we could do without putting ourselves in a position where we're not adding enough to reserves to keep aside if we need it?
Good question, Chair Minions. I think when we look at the report that's coming next, the reserve policy, I think that's a conversation to start to assign some of our surpluses or have specific amounts for our reserves to address asset management or any strategic priorities. But this year, you know, we could be, you know, I'm very conservative because I don't like to quote a number until I see that, and we're going through that process right now. But you know, if we had $500,000 assigned, we could allocate that to reserves or address that taxation. It's really what council would like to see. So if the committee has some thoughts, I could follow up and bring some information forward as far as allocation of surplus and what that would mean. And when we look at a reduction in taxation, it's about $250,000 is about 1%. So if council is looking or seeking specifics, we can definitely address that in a follow-up.
Thank you. I think that we want to definitely find the balance between reducing, you know, financial impact to homeowners or to residents and businesses, and making sure that we are putting enough aside for changes that can come, specifically, you know, as we continue to move through COVID. I know we have those COVID restart funds still, but things can change, and you know, we've already talked about the gaming revenue, and we saw a big change in that came very quickly, obviously, and we know that could come again. I would be curious to see some options around, you know, bringing the increase down 1%. I think right now we're looking at just under 5%. How would we get to just under 4%? I'm also curious about options to not fund the Key to Key project through general taxation. I know that's something that we've talked about, where we would ideally like to not be funding not just the Key to Key, but our strategic plan initiatives through taxation. And we've been creative with land sales, obviously, and in being able to achieve the SOMAS purchase, for instance, without having to go to the taxpayers and increasing tax revenue for that. I think we'd like to, as a matter of practice, whenever possible, try to not increase taxation for our strategic initiative. So if that's something that we could look at to fund the $200,000 that we need from the Key to Key through a different mechanism this year, I think Council would like to see information on that. Councillor Solda.
And another thing to add to that one is the tax base has increased, right? And I would like to see, do we have an estimate of our dollar value with that increase as well, or a percentage? I mean, that might help a lot too, and for taxes and that. So I think. Yeah,
I think the question is the non-market change already factored into the budget or not?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bigger question, I think, with that one. Right now, we haven't set the tax burdens across because of the large change across. So, I think we're looking at where the financial plan is set, and then there's obviously the ability to appeal. So, we'll be fairly close, but, as far as that tax rate discussion on the 21st of March, I think that's where we can dive in and say, okay, these are the percentage increase because of non-market change, and we can give council or the committee at the time just some more details on how that could be used across each class, and try to do that balance based on the increases in each class because of that non-market change.
Because we always talk about that. If our population increases, it'll bring our taxes down a bit. So we talk about that. So I'll wait. I'll be looking forward to seeing that. Thank you.
And it always does bring our tax rate impact down. But that said, the amount is becoming more significant. And so where in the past we haven't talked very intentionally about non-market change because we haven't had a lot of non-market change in the community. Now with all of the new construction we have with multifamily, with industrial, and even quite a bit of new commercial and construction, obviously those numbers are becoming more significant, and I think spending some real time to determine how we're going to allocate those new tax dollars is more important now than ever.
So exciting.
It is exciting. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, I think we can move on to the next report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate all that information. And we will go to the Deputy Director of Finance for a report on reserve funds.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I presented a report just basically outlining all the reserves that we do have, also some proposed reserves. And I did this because I want to open the discussion with you all, get a good understanding of how we can look at aligning our financial planning and strategic initiatives by looking at our reserves. I proposed a consolidated bylaw because basically it takes everything and all the information we have, puts it under one bylaw for us to review on an annual basis. So there's a number of benefits to having the consolidated bylaw, so just easier to manage, easier to know where the information's found, allows us to look at specific purpose, reallocating existing funds if needed, and just basically every year allows for a discussion. Under one bylaw, you can repeal, add, have a greater discussion around it if it's under one bylaw. So that was kind of the purpose of this report. And speaking to the current reserves, all of your current reserves, sorry, here I'm gonna flip this. So all of our current reserves are well established. Having them in that one bylaw will allow for ease of discussion, combining, creating, and helps reallocate the existing reserve balances if needed. So we do have a number of well-established reserves. We have our IRF, we have our parks, lands, Rcmp surplus. We have a number of different reserves. We've done a great job at identifying them and knowing what needs are out there for IRF, Rcmp, sewer and water infrastructure. We are ahead of the game in lots of ways by looking at having these infrastructure reserves and IRFs in that we're actually already participating a lot in asset management. But looking at the reserves on an annual basis, understanding their specific purpose, are we putting enough money aside? It ties hand in hand with asset management. And having it all in one established bylaw is just going to make that easier as a review process for council and making it a part of your financial and your strategic plan. So I did propose some new reserves in this bylaw, which I hope you had time to take a look at. And again, that's just to open up the conversation about reserve establishment, helping guiding allocating funds for specific purpose for reserves. So what discussion should be had? What do we need to review? And why do we need to create new reserves? Basically, it just brings us align with our strategic initiatives, our strategic objectives, and our financial planning. So on a yearly basis, having that review, seeing what we do have, does it align with your strategic initiatives? If it doesn't, we can go back to the drawing table, repeal, change things, look at balances, analyze balances, minimum and maximum targets for reserves, etc. So I just, in my PowerPoint here, I've kind of looked at different reasons as to why we establish reserves, how do we guide establishing reserves. Change is constant. Council did a great job of putting together a strategic plan. You know what your initiatives are and you know what you want done. So it's just a matter of making sure that the staff can take those initiatives and make sure that we are reserving the amounts that need to be done for your initiatives. So basically, this table here are these little bubbles and such kind of represent different things that either we have already in reserves or new initiatives we can look at. So new initiatives such as climate action, climate change, different special initiatives that may come up or opportunities that may come up throughout the year that council wants to partake in. Having funds set aside in those reserves could be from accumulated surplus, revenues or grants received throughout the year, just allows the opportunity for council to take those funds and apply them and not affect any of our taxation or budget throughout the year. So having these new purpose funds established will just allow you more opportunity throughout the year to meet your strategic initiatives. So just for next steps today, I just want you to take a look, and if you have any questions about any of the proposed reserves, I kind of want to take this as an opportunity to basically review and have a good discussion about it. I would like to take the reserves that we currently have and look at other opportunities, make sure that we've clearly defined the purpose and the funding sources, consolidate, if need be, eliminate small balances in reserves that may no longer meet council's strategic initiatives, and combine and create specific purpose reserves, and reallocate existing funds if needed. So when I say eliminate small balances or reallocate funds, in our financials, when we do the accounting, throughout the years, we have kind of saved up funds for specific initiatives or projects that may not have come to fruition, and these monies are set aside. allowing us to take those small balances and put them in a specific purpose reserve. Just allows council that opportunity to take those funds and use them for something that aligns with your initiatives. You'll notice in the report itself, we have a new gas tax account. We also have our capital works reserve, which I've kind of proposed some changes to as well. Currently in our capital works, it holds a bunch of groupings of funds. So we have our gas tax, which we always talk as a gas tax reserve, but it's actually not separate. It's kept in that same pocket. So what I would like to do is take that gas tax out, make it a separate reserve, so we know exactly how much is allocated to projects at a gas tax and what isn't allocated. Same thing with capital works. If we have projects in our operating funds, we have projects dating back to 2018 or 2021, we haven't been able to accomplish those, and those funds sit in different reserves. We would like to take those and group them all into the capital works reserve so we understand the exact amount of operating capital we have available and allocated to specific projects. That just allows you to see what money we have put towards capital works, which is allocated to projects, and what is unallocated and can be used for other projects. So water and sewer funds, we already kind of do this with. They have their own infrastructure funds. It's kind of clearly seen. And when we look at the operating budget, and we have operating reserve, and money is coming from each of those things, it's not as clear. And I think that if we have it all in the one fund, it's going to provide council with just that clear understanding of what's available and how much we're spending on capital in our operating fund. So there is some other discussion I'd like to have in the future of linking reserves and financial planning. So what I've put on paper is completely up for discussion. And if there are certain initiatives that want to be, you want to set up separate reserves for, I'd like to make sure that we have those conversations, whether that be directed through the audit committee or directed through future COWs or council meetings. I'd like to start the process of that. So I've kind of laid out a couple steps here on how we can take a look at our reserves. Step one, looking at the current report that I've issued out, either accepting the reserves, repealing our old reserves and creating the Consolidated Bylaw. Step two would be looking at our funding sources. Once we have our reserves established that we want to have meeting your specific purposes, how are we going to fund them? So do we have accumulated surplus that's unallocated from prior years? And how can we go about taking that number and make sure that we're putting aside adequate funds into these reserves through grants, other revenue sources that we come up with surpluses throughout the budget year? Step three is basically creating that process, that contribution process. So our annual review of reserves, what we're putting into reserves, and how we go about that process. So is it something that we make a part of our financial plan? Do we make it a separate thing that we do prior to heading into our financial plan, that so we understand all our funds available? And step four, making sure that we, for applicable reserves, establish minimum and maximum amounts to go in. A really good example of this is our IRF reserve, and hopefully our asset management reserve, our operating capital reserve. When we do and we have these asset management plans in our hands by department area, we have a really good understanding of what needs to go in a targeted amount each year. So that basically sums up the report itself. I know I've kind of just sprinkled a lot of information at you, so I'll open it up for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Are there questions? Councillor Solda.
So I'm big on reserves. I believe, I like to have money in the kitty so we don't go and hit the taxpayers all at once. And I think they're important. So my question to you is, when I look at what the proposal for the reserves, not all departments that are here, like as an example, the Aquatic Center replacement, which to me is very, very important, and I'm sure to the rest of the council here. But there is, how do we get the money for that? Where are we going to get that? They don't have a surplus of money. Parks and Rec they don't make money, right, in that sense. We're always at a red, so how are we going to have money for that particular one project? McLean's Mill projects, where are we going to get the dollars for that? But saying that, again, I'm big on reserves, so I just need to know where we're going to get the money for this.
And you know what, it's a part of the planning process, Councillor Solde, and I think having this conversation of, we need to look at what are our unallocated accumulated surpluses as a whole of the city, what is a healthy surplus, and going forward and putting those targets in place. Last year we did have an $8.9 million surplus. You know, some of that sprinkled and allocated into Rcmp reserves, other reserves. Some of that was grant money received. Some of that we put back into capital projects. I think the bigger question is, how would we like to proceed with this going forward? How do we analyze our funds and know what we can put aside into the reserves?
So, Madam Mayor, I guess that's a discussion we'll be having in the near future. Okay.
Yeah, and I think if I could add to that, for me, the conversation is about how much do we want to intentionally contribute to each of our reserves. I would actually like us to have a conversation about, and you just mentioned, what is a healthy surplus. We operate, I mean, I've never known the city to not have a surplus. And in my opinion, I mean, there certainly is a healthy limit, but I think that a consistent surplus is overtaxing. Overtaxing at least for the intended purpose, and then ending up spreading it among other, spreading it into reserves that it wasn't intended for, because it was intended, I mean, if we had $100,000 for council travel last year and none of that was spent, and I know that's not the specific amount, that ends up then getting redirected into capital works surplus, or reserve. And that's just not, that feels very unintentional to me. So I would like us to focus more, and I think that we are, based on budgeting, based on the past 5 years of actuals. I would like us to operate not with a $900,000 surplus every year, but with a very minimal surplus and intentional contributions budgeted to go into our reserves. It's great that we consistently come back with a surplus. It shows that we're being diligent in how we spend our money, and making sure that the money that we are budgeting, we are not going over. In fact, we are often going under. I know that we obviously do go over on some projects, and in the last few years with construction costs have been, we've had expected overages in those areas. But I think that for me, the amounts that we have pretty consistently had surpluses in the time that I've been on council, which is, around 7 years, have been pretty significant, and it feels like we need to probably draw down some of those budgets. And it doesn't mean we draw down what we're taxing, but it means we draw down what we're budgeting for those services in those specific areas, and we intentionally determine what level we want to contribute to reserves for going forward, rather than the opposite of overtaxing up front for purposes that might be unrelated, and then taking that surplus and determining where we want to put it after. So I think this is great that we're having this conversation. I think that we should be setting targeted amounts for contributing to our reserves and taxing for those, and then coming in very close to our budgeted amount every year, rather than having large surpluses. Any other comments? Okay. So yeah, really excited to start this conversation. And so if I understand from your slides, the next, if council, will this come back to a future council meeting?
I think that we're gonna come back to you with what we have. If council likes what they see as the reserves, my next step would be bringing that to a council meeting, establishing this bylaw, moving forward with understanding the amounts in it, what's going to be transferred, and then having a greater conversation and maybe directing this to an audit committee or a committee to look at what type of process council wants to see for the future.
Okay. And Twyla, would you like us to give direction today? I mean, I know that we're just at a committee level, but today on whether or not there's any changes needed to the actual suggested reserves?
I think if we're looking for some direction to staff, I would invite your review of the items that have been outlined in this report, and if that seems to meet where committee members would like to go, provide that direction, and then at least it gives us a framework to create that bylaw for further consideration.
Great. I think that would be a great next step, and reviewing the suggested reserves and kind of the framework of the report. I think this is definitely the next step, is bringing it back for suggested bylaw. Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you. Is it fair to ask the Director of Finance to give us a list of this $8.9 million surplus of what those issues were? Like, just glancing at paving, for example, it looks like there's several $1 million that was budgeted that didn't get spent. I think the bigger question is, why is there a surplus? Why were we not able to spend it? And I'd be very curious to see what that $8.9 million entailed.
If I can just clarify, when I say $8.9 million surplus, it's not unallocated. It is, a lot of that is allocated to your capital projects. So I'm not saying all of this is free money that, you know, as in surplus. It's just money unspent that particular year. And a lot of that surplus is already allocated. If they're, you know, looking at a smaller unallocated portion just helps you be able to direct that. And that's what we want to do by having these reserves set up, is be able to show you what you do have allocated and what's not allocated.
If I could, I appreciate that, and I realize that. For example, the paving is allocated for this year, but I guess, you know, we should try to figure out why do things not get spent when we budget for them, you know, for 2021, for example. That was my point.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
It might be helpful to have the last 5 years of what the unallocated surplus that went into the general reserve was. And council hasn't, until recently, really even seen that amount. I mean, we see it in some parts of the process, but we don't see it as a part of the financial plan process, I think until last year, because we didn't have those final numbers yet. So, yeah, I think that it just kind of goes into the general, or into the operating reserve or general reserve, or whichever reserve it goes into, without there being a real process around that. And I think last year it was around $500,000, if I remember correctly. So it's not a small amount, you know, certainly not massive in the grand scheme of a $30 million budget, but not an insignificant amount. And I think that I'd be curious to know really where that's coming from, and just, again, making sure that we're not setting some of our budgets too high and then ending up with these unallocated funds moving forward and just going into a reserve. So I think that this process is going to take us to where we need to get to, for sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Solda, did you have another comment?
Well, the comment was to do with the reserves. So some of the projects that the excess money goes to projects that aren't completed for the following year. Isn't that how it normally works? I'm assuming, like, if the roads had to be done, but we couldn't do them for this winter or something happened, but they're going to be done, that particular, the allocated reserve is going to go to that project to complete the following year. Is that?
That's correct. So if you tax on a project, and that's coming out of your operating fund, it would, if it didn't get completed that year, it would come out of your operating reserve the following year.
But would it be listed as reserves still? It would still be listed in the reserves, wouldn't it?
It'd be listed on, if you were looking at it from a budget perspective, it would come out of that, it would say operating reserve.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That's
it's
what I
not something that's actually in one of your dedicated reserves that's on your bylaw.
Yes.
That's what I would like would like to propose is that if we do have projects that are coming out of operating, that haven't been completed, that we would move those to a capital works reserve, so you could see all of the money that would be set aside for those particular
And
projects.
it would be great to have a date of completion on there too. Thank you.
Thank you. So would council like to give direction today to just proceed with this work and continue?
I'll move that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Poon. Seeing no comments, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosalind.
Thanks.
Okay, and item number 2 from the Director of Finance and Director of Corporate Services, draft procurement policy and delegation bylaw.
Thank you, Chair Minutes. So what we'll do today is Twyla and I will tag team on this one, and I'll start just by reviewing the report that was included in the Committee of the Whole agenda, and that's to do with the procurement, and then Twyla will address the delegation of authority, which goes hand in hand with the procurement policy. So, as you know, the procurement policy or the purchasing policies we have some current policies in place, and those are fairly dated. Looking back, I think we did an update back in 2014 on the. Hey, no worries.
I have my screen up, it just wasn't displaying there. There is your report.
Okay. So with this, we have obviously I did have that PowerPoint too. Yeah, please. Yes, thank you. So with the current policies that we have, obviously they are some dated policies, and there's a few policies that are related to purchasing. So obviously some of the best practice would not to have various policies, because that does cause some confusion, and staff need to understand what policy is applicable. So if we have a consolidated procurement policy, we can create some working documents that support staff's understanding as far as what's required for procurement, and it's all in one place, so it's easy to reference. But anyways, the current policies are listed for council, and that includes purchasing for capital expenditures, purchasing for capital purchases and projects, the capital budget, the project variance policy, that's a separate policy. And then the purchasing procedure, which was updated in 2014, but I think that goes back to 2008, I think was the last major update. And then purchasing for professional services. So with the current structure, we have the department head role, which is responsible for drafting the RFPs, getting everything in order, and then handing that over to finance, the purchasing clerk position that's assumed within another role to support that RFP or tender or any other procurement that's undertaken. So it's something that the department head has to undertake, and that does expose a little bit of a risk to the organization, because we don't have that consistent role overseeing that specific purpose. So other organizations would see a specific purchasing clerk or a purchasing manager to oversee the purchasing of the organization, depending on the size of the organization. So that currently resides with the department heads. Finance, as I mentioned, supports that and understands what is required, and will give advice to those department heads and review those RFPs or tenders that come through, mostly the RFPs, of course. And then council would have that procurement in front of them if it meets the purchasing thresholds that council must approve. So professional services is anything over $50,000. And when it comes to contracts for other things, it would be $75,000 currently. some of the best practices focus on a local first, and I know we do have some language in our policy about local first if there is a variance of less than $1,000, but that's not something that is recommended or best practice. What is being done is we see that social procurement as a component of purchasing policies now, and leveraging the ability to quote locally and undertake procurement based on those trade agreements that we have to live up to, as far as the Canada Free Trade or the European Union trade agreements, or even our interprovincial trade agreements. So I'll discuss that shortly. But some of the best practices would be modernizing these policies to include compliance with these trade agreements, focus on emerging trends and best practices within purchasing, and that social and sustainable procurement. So where we have the ability to do that is when we look at RFPs, we design the criteria within that RFP to select proponents that are providing that best value for the city. That includes probably putting opportunities for trades, maybe other components of a project where they might provide a community benefit. So if we can work that in and allow proponents to bid on those social procurements or those community advantages, that allows them to come out ahead of others if they provide that component within that RFP. And then we are, of course, are looking for improved guidance and internal and external controls within the organization and externally. So we want to be an organization that bidders want to bid on projects. So we want to ensure that we're giving good information, putting out good procurements, being fair, and that will attract best prices, and that would also attract quality bids. We want to ensure that council isn't lobbied or even perceived to be lobbied in certain circumstances. So a lot of the best practices won't provide that ability for bidders to lobby council on their behalf, or have that interaction with the procurement when there could be some risk involved. Because if council sets the budget for an item and we undertake a procurement, we should base our selection based on the criteria within that procurement. And just maintaining that level of transparency. So when we bid, when we have bidders bid, we communicate back to them, and they understand the reasons for the selection of the proponents. Some large organizations might provide the ability to have a debrief as far as what procurement, what was their deficiencies in the application or the bids. So it's something that we don't have the resources to do right now, because it would take a procurement professional or that level. But that is some best practice that we do see in other local governments. So when we look at the trade agreements and the procurement type, when it comes to NUPTA, that's the interprovincial trade agreement. And that for general goods and services, there's that $75,000 threshold. So we have to ensure that we are living up to those procurement requirements with goods and services. When it comes to the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, that's a little bit higher at over $120,000. And then the European component is much higher at nearly $350,000. When it comes to construction, the thresholds are a little bit higher, of course, and that's $200,000 for the NUPTA. So we want to ensure that our policy is aligning with those trade agreements, often because the provinces are the signers onto those agreements, but because we rely on senior government for grant funding and purchases, we do want to make sure that we are in alignment with those requirements that the province would put on us if we do have those trade agreements and those grant funding opportunities. Looking for increased efficiency, and some of the challenges that we found here is that just reacting in a timely fashion to awards of contract when we know that the successful bidder is a certain bidder. We've followed the procurement and the requirements for that RFP, and we bring that to council for the award. Often in other local governments, the mechanism to conduct your procurement process and approve that process is during the financial plan. So staff would need to make sure that council understood exactly what that procurement is if it's a project. And at that time, if council wants to know more information about a specific project, that's the time that they need to have those details. They can always bring that back if they choose to and say this is a project that we have concern for, whether it's a environmental risk or a sensitive issue that council would like to see. But there's always risk involved in bringing it back to council, because the process is the process. With an RFP, you select it based on the criteria at hand. So we see some other communities on the island, such as the City of Courtenay, Comox, Cowichan, Valley Regional District, and West Vancouver, to mention a few, but their processes include that financial plan where the project is clearly identified, and then approval of that financial plan allows the Director of Engineering to go out and do his RFP or tender, and if he has the financial ability to do that, then he can proceed and award that contract based on the delegation that council gives to certain staff members. Buying local and transparency. So the draft policy in front of the committee today doesn't explicitly favor local businesses, but we do have the ability to quote for services or construction or any RFP based on those thresholds within those trade agreements. So that allows us to select proponents that we know would be meeting the needs of the city, but we still have to ensure that we are getting good value for taxpayers' dollars. So we shouldn't rely on the RFP and those process for those smaller amounts when we know that there's these solutions out there and they are good value for the taxpayers. So the social procurement component, that allows the city to provide the opportunities to those suppliers of services and products, the opportunity within the procurement policy in draft today. So this should reduce the burden on the city to bring back certain approvals to council, but we still have to ensure that there is a requirement to meet the budget that we have. And in the current policy, we do allow a 10% overage for projects without coming back to council. That is not a best practice. If we go over budget, we need to make sure that we bring back that project to council for any budgetary improvements or its cost escalations. So we have to maintain transparency. We would publicly post procurement opportunities on our webpage and BC Bid, and then also publicly post those contract awards. And that's the same as we do currently. With social procurement, we are a member of the BC SPI, so that is the social, used to be the Coastal Communities social procurement group, but that has changed, and there is some provincial support for that organization now. The group has reviewed this draft policy, and we've incorporated some of the recommendations around social procurement within the policy, so that has been done. And the draft today is included with that information from BC SPI. Next steps, I would like to take committee's input on that draft policy that we have in front of you today. Just knowing that it is quite a shift from what we currently do, and that's bringing the financial plan forward, ensuring that council is supportive of that project within the financial plan, and then you would see that being reported out as I included a report in the agenda that shows what we would normally report out every year. That's one practice. We could do that at quicker intervals so that you have more understanding of the projects that have been committed to, but it is quite a shift, so I expect the committee and council to have some questions around that, and bringing forward any additional information that council or the committee would like to see, any concerns, make a recommendation back to council if you feel it's the time, or just bring back more information to council. So really, it's just starting that conversation, understanding that we are trying to achieve some best practices. We're open to any conversations about what needs to be done, but just looking for that update, because it is a fairly stale-dated policy, and we do want to ensure that our policy is up to current best practices. So,
Does council want to ask questions now about procurement before we go to the delegation bylaw? Councillor Solda.
Just some of these procurements were written when I was on council in the past, because I'm looking at the dates here. The biggest thing was that local was able to respond, and obviously to bid on, and also there was that small window that we would go with the local people, and that's really important to me, that local definitely gets considered in that. They paid the taxes here, not the people from out, and recognizing that they don't have the equipment and some of the things that out-of-town people might have, construction and stuff like that. I've never had anybody lobby me for, hey, pick me, because we have a process, and the process is a sealed bid when we put it out there, and the envelopes are opened at the time the date is completed for that sealed bid. So, I mean, if it's updating, I agree that we need to update it, but I caution that to make sure that local is very much out there. And I also want to know on budget time what we're spending. I don't want to just go, oh, surprise, this is what we're doing. I want communication, definitely.
Thank you. If you want to comment on the local aspect first, and then I've got a follow-up question about budget and detail.
Yeah. Good question on Councillor Solda, just with local. That I understand, and the advice I've been given is that we can't rely on that provision. If there was a bidder that was lower and the selection criteria required, I indicated that bidder might be, let's say, a Parksville company, and our local bidder was $999 more. If we follow procurement law, that would require us to select the proponent that was the lowest bid. If they met all the criteria and their bid was successful, we couldn't rely on that language in the procurement or the purchasing policy. So it's important that we select the abilities to use local, and we can do that with those thresholds, understanding that the onus is on staff to ensure that we are looking for those local options based on the quotes that we have within the new draft policy here. So if we look on page 60 of the agenda, there is the procurement thresholds and methods that allow us to get quotes or a procurement process depending on the level that's required. So this is where staff would have the ability to seek quotes and still ensure that we have best value for taxpayer dollars. So just because a local vendor pays taxes here, we still need to make sure that we are getting good value for taxpayer dollars. So we'd get the quotes, and then we could award based on that quote. And it wouldn't need to come back to council if we have the budget for it and we're not over in the new procurement.
Thank you. My question is around level of detail that we will see at budget time, because, of course, we do get a list of capital projects, but much of what is in the budget that, procurement may be for would not be capital. And how can we, first of all, I guess I should clarify, is this only for capital, or would this be for other contracts?
This would include everything, Chair Minions, anything for procurement. It really depends on what level of expenditure it is, and it would meet within the thresholds. So,
yeah. So I think my only concern with that is for capital projects, we know exactly detail, line by line, what projects are going to be undertaken in a year. But when it comes to operational, we really don't have that information. The budget is, there's a lot of projects that are lumped into lines where we don't know what is in there that may be new in a year or might just be like staffing costs. We don't have that level of detail, although we have a lot of detail in the budget. We don't have broken down understanding of what's in some of the lines. And so we do occasionally hear of projects happening that may go out to a contractor that we didn't explicitly approve in a budget. Of course, we passed the whole financial plan, but may not have been aware of that specific project happening. So I guess I can certainly support on the capital side where we see the projects that are coming in and are going to be going through this process. And I think there's a lot of value in having one consistent procurement policy and very clear expectations of how many quotes you need to get and who approves, and getting rid of the 10% overage. That certainly makes sense to me. But it's all of what is in the general operating plan that we don't have, because we are not engaged in the day-to-day operating. We don't always have an understanding of what is in each line. The hammer throw, for instance, last year was work that council didn't know was going to be undertaken, and that would fall into, I would imagine would probably fall into a single written quote under construction. So how can we, through this new policy, have confidence that operational projects that are just within the existing operational budgets that we don't need to see those?
That's an excellent question, and that's where we need to gauge what council needs to see. So if we know that a painting project might be something that council would like to understand, we need to pull that out and provide that in the financial plan and say, this is how it is, and this is the component that we are anticipating for that specific project. So that is a great example, and if council needs to understand those specific projects, like those one-offs, it's not that operating, like how many gloves are we buying? I'm sure that council doesn't want to know our glove supplier, but what I hear is that council would like to see those special projects that need to be understood. So if we are painting the fire hall, if we are doing any other project, it is something that we identify and council knows, even though they won't see that come back. So
yeah.
It comes back to us making sure that council has the information, the public has the information that they need to know that we're doing that work.
Thank you. And I think that, just through that conversation or through that response, maybe it is about the one-time projects, whether they're capital or operating. The one-time project, something that's not a recurring cost or a recurring service provider that we're using. I think that's where council will need additional detail, especially in the early implementation of a new policy like this, to have confidence and understanding of everything that's going on if those projects will no longer come back to council in the same approval format. And then just wanted to comment as well, and so maybe we can take that into consideration in drafting the next step of this policy. I really like the reporting style that you've got kind of an example of here, and I think it's really clear, it's very transparent, and that is a really good step. If council has approved specifically of items in the budget, then I think this makes a lot of sense to move forward. Are there other comments? Councillor Corbeil.
A question I would have, Andrew, in regards to the hiring of consultants under professional services, and this was, now correct me if I'm wrong, what you're talking about today would replace what was done in 2014, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So even though we didn't adhere to this all that well, the 2014 bylaw said the retention of professional services is generally required to access specialized expertise not able to be provided by city staff. And it went on to say department heads are responsible for ensuring that when retaining professional services supporting their department's operations and projects, this policy is observed at all times. And then there's a list of what is generally thought of as professional services. We haven't always adhered to that. And I'd like to see this not only in the new policy, but probably more beefed up. That in fact, if you're going to use a consultant that isn't one of these 12 people or whatever's in the scope here, that there has to be some sort of rationale why it's needed. So on page 80, what's that, a 6 or an 8? 80, page 80 of the agenda.
So with the draft policy, Councillor Corbeil, what we've included is professional services. So these are services that we can't have in-house, like we don't have the ability to perform in-house. And it's not I think when we look at that list, it's not exhaustive, because there's always going to be a specific service that's unique, you know, whether it might be a specific type of engineer or something that's emerging. If we don't have the skill set inside the organization, we need to seek that outside. So within the purchasing policy, if we do have specifics, like if we need to do a project, I'm hearing one-time projects for professional services. It sounds like council, based on the little bit of discussion we had here today, would like to see that come back. So we would need to make sure that if we have something specifically that needs to be expended in the year, and it's in operations, but it's for a let's say some safety review, then we bring that to council in the budgeting and say that we need to ensure that this is there, and then it's professional services, so it would meet those thresholds, and we would expend that if council supports that. So this is just us feeling out where council wants to go, or the committee wants to go, and I'm hearing that we want to have those specific one-time items, including professional services.
Thank you, and for clarity on my end, I think my intent was that those would come as much as possible as a part of the budget. And then anyone's, of course, that, and then, you know, if it's approved as a part of a budget with council's awareness that is in the budget, painting, for instance. Although, again, not just any normal painting, but out of the norm painting, a one-time painting rather than maintenance. That those would come at budget time, and then we would approve them, then it would move forward as a matter of this policy. And then, of course, anything that did come up throughout the year would normally come to us anyways, because it wouldn't be budgeted for. But this would bring some clarity to the fact that it would need to come to us. Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, yes. And I'm thinking right now, Chair Minions, is when we look at the Parks and Rec facilities upgrades, there's a bunch of items in there, and I'm looking at, you know, in my head, I'm thinking there's a $10,000 amount in there for some siding that we need to do at Echo Center. So is that something that we need to bring back, or do you provide the ability for the manager of facilities to do his job and get that quoted based on what he has in the financial plan?
And I think it'll be really important for us to give some more thought beyond just today's meeting to what those thresholds are. I think for anything that we are going to give ability to a manager to sole source, for instance, to, you know, a single written quote for up to $50,000, and of course we could draw that back, because $50,000 for a single written quote is a reasonable limit, but could be certainly justified in a lot of circumstances. I think that council would want to know and have confidence, know up front that those funds were being spent. And so the challenge gets into, if we do delegate a lot of this, the challenge gets into how much detail are we provided during the budget, and where is the threshold of something that is just regular maintenance versus more of a one-time project. And it's been a long day already, so maybe I'm tired and not thinking straight, but I don't know exactly what, you know, that limit or threshold is. I think personally I need to give some more thought to it. I think there's a lot of value in moving forward with a policy like this. I just want to make sure that council is comfortable and aware of what the implications are of it. Councillor Solda.
The problem is that we have to answer to the public, and we get a lot of questions. Even today, I get questions about, what are we doing over there? I'll just check with staff and I'll get back to you, right? And so we're in the hot seat, and that's the problem. So I agree with you on what you're saying too, on that 50,000 there, yes.
Yeah, so I would say we certainly don't want to be, you know, every single project coming back to council. In fact, I think this is intended from staff's perspective and supported by council, that this would reduce some things coming to council where they do fall within process. I think what we want to make sure is that council is aware and informed, so that there doesn't become, you know, concern or an implied lack of trust where trust obviously exists. We want to make sure that council has all the information that they need to be able to feel comfortable delegating this authority. Scott?
I guess I just did want to say that this is the beginning, you know, this intent of this report is to begin the discussion with the committee and council on how to move forward. And in some cases, it will require staff to bring more detail as part of the budget process, so that council does have confidence in a particular project if they choose to delegate certain aspects of it, so that you're not having, so I think you're right, it is a long day for council, so this is just beginning the discussion to present some of this information that you know, we want council to consider, and then, you know, as we move forward, to give more direction. So that's all.
Thank you. So I don't know if there's specific direction for us to send back right now, but I would like some thought to be given around how we determine that threshold of what comes to council during budget in projects that basically, you know, have a budget attached to them that may currently just sit as a part of a line item that we may not know is there. Going forward, what meets the threshold of needing to be identified to council beforehand and what wouldn't under this policy? If that makes sense.
It does, Chair Minions. I think when I look at, you know, just the finance component, I'm thinking that asset retirement obligation, I need to identify that council, hey, I need to get some professional service for this, or we're doing appraisals this year. So those are the items, and then if council has no concern with that, I go in ahead and get it done, and then you get that report in detail. Oh, we awarded to this company for this amount at this date, and this was within budget. And we had one bid, or we had two bids, and it just provides that kind of snapshot of what's gone on in the past period.
Absolutely. Okay. Any further questions, comments, information we'd like to see come back on this policy? Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew, for the report and for the follow-ups on it. We will go to Twyla.
More items to consider. Okay, so with Andrew bringing forward an amendment to the procurement practices and the policy itself, it certainly lent itself to bringing forward members of the committee to consider delegation of authority. With delegation of authority, your ability to do so comes from the community charter, and specifically it allows council the ability to delegate certain responsibilities, and you can delegate to a council member, you can delegate to a council committee, officer or employee of a municipality, or another body established by council. The broad authority to delegate is balanced with accountability to the public by having specific limitations on delegation, and in certain cases, reconsideration mechanisms for those decisions made by a delegated person or body. If you do go forward with a delegation of authority, it must be done by bylaw. It would allow the delegated person or body to conduct detailed and focused consideration of the operation or administration of a service or a function of the municipality, and it gives council the ability to focus on the broader and longer-term needs of the municipality and contributes to increasing efficiency of service delivery. So a couple of examples are given here on the next slide. If you were to direct staff to move forward with preparing a delegation of authority bylaw, we would be capturing approval limits for contracts and commitments for provision of goods and services or other city activities or works or services, and it would align with the procurement policy. So right now it does identify the CAO and along with the Director of Finance that they could approve up to something in the amount of $100,000. Directors and Fire Chief up to $75,000 and so on. And that's consistent with the draft policy right now. The next example is very similar, to delegate authority to sign or execute a contract or a commitment other than an excluded document. And again, it's perhaps the mayor with the corporate officer being able to sign any amount, the CAO together with the corporate officer, $100,000 and so on. An example of an excluded document might be, could be your LTO registrations, like anything that has to get registered at Land Title Office, they would not be delegated. Other considerations, it's easier to identify for members of the committee what you can't delegate versus what you could delegate. So I just wanted to give you a couple of topics that you could have in your delegating authority bylaw. Committee of the whole is an example, and what I would say here is when you do make a recommendation at the committee level, you are recommending to council that council direct staff. In your delegating authority bylaw, you could be just having committee of the whole members able to delegate directly to staff and save one of those steps. Another example would be delegating the municipal audit, and you would perhaps consider delegating those authorities to the audit committee. Parcel tax roll review panel, which could be delegated to the Director of Finance. Business licensing, in this example, you could delegate to the Director of Development Services. Agreements, depending on the agreement at hand, I'm using works and services as an example, that could be delegated to the Director of Engineering and Public Works. The list goes on. You could delegate authority to commence or defend legal actions on the part of the city, settle claims. You could delegate land sale and purchases, and then you could also delegate land approvals such as DPs, DVPs, TUPs, and sign permits. DVPs is a new delegation of authority, and it's not quite positioned yet. Bill 26 was introduced at the Legislative Assembly in 2021. If that bill is passed, that would give you the ability to delegate minor development variance permit issues, subject to criteria, of course. Exceptions of what council cannot delegate. If legislation speaks to the establishment of doing something by bylaw, you cannot delegate that authority. A power or duty exercisable only by bylaw, you cannot delegate. You cannot delegate a power or duty established by this or any other act that the council gives its approval or consent to. An example of that would be municipal council consents to participate in a regional district service. Council cannot delegate making the decision to consent, as it is a power established by the Local Government Act. You cannot delegate a power or duty established by an enactment that the council hear an appeal or reconsider an action, decision, or other matter. A power or duty to appoint or suspend a municipal officer, unless you can appoint or suspend a municipal officer that can be delegated if you grant it to the CAO as an authority. You cannot delegate a power or duty to terminate the appointment of an officer, and you can't delegate the power to impose a remedial action. And you will recall council did that in a couple instances last year. A bylaw delegating authority must include reconsideration language. For example, should council delegate authority to the Director of Development Services to grant, refuse, suspend, or cancel a business license, the bylaw would include reconsideration language such as a business license applicant or holder that is subject to a decision made under delegated authority is entitled to have the decision reconsidered by council in accordance with this section. That section would go on to identify the applicant would need to request a reconsideration within 30 days, for example. He would have to he or she would have to lay out the rationale why they're asking for a reconsideration. those are just some of the examples that would be captured right in the delegation bylaw if you move ahead. So next steps for members to consider is that they could direct council to direct staff to prepare a bylaw delegating authority. The bylaw would be prepared so as to balance the need for both council oversight and corporate control with operational efficiency. The bylaw will include mechanisms to have decisions reconsidered in accordance with city bylaws and section 156 of the community charter. And just to delegation of authority does align with your strategic priorities. Number 3, to provide and maintain quality services. Specifically, goal 3.2, the city provides quality local government services with a strategy to explore current practices and services with an eye for opportunities to free up city resources for other priorities. And then just the goal of establishing a delegating bylaw, it is meant to strengthen council's ability to engage in effective policy creation and strategic governance and increase operational efficiencies.
Thank you very much, Twyla. Council, are there questions? Okay. Do we already have some of these authorities delegated, like business licensing, for instance, we don't see at council?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, not some of them aren't there, to be honest. Some are there. Your fire services bylaw does give authority to the fire chief, for example, but no, not to the level of detail.
Okay, thank you. Well, from my perspective, this is something that we've been talking about bringing forward for quite a few years, and I'm happy to see it coming forward, especially given the challenges that we are having with maintaining the level of development applications that we are seeing. So I know that there are some examples of other types of delegations we could look at, and I'll be interested to hear what council's interest is in some of the specific examples. But specifically around, variance, like minor variances, and I recall a situation where we had to give a variance to a house that had been built about 6 inches off of where it was supposed to be built, and that came to, I think, 3 council meetings. So I think of the staff time involved in that, and the council time where we could be focusing on higher level priorities. And I think there's some really good examples of areas where we would be able to delegate authority. We often hear from developers, around the waiting times for things to get to council meetings for development permits, where I think we have to maintain the larger items, and I think the critical piece will be determining, again, what is that threshold for what comes to council and what doesn't come to council. But I think we have a real opportunity here to streamline some processes, and for me that is specifically in the planning department, where we're seeing just an unprecedented amount of development applications, and no matter how many planners we hire, I don't think we'll be able to get through them in a manner that is the timeline that we're hoping to get through them in. So where it is not necessary for something to come to council, again, I remember a front porch that was built and had a 6-inch variance and had to come to a couple of council meetings. I think certainly those smaller items, but thinking of possibly parking variances, where we typically go with the staff recommendation anyways, based on what makes sense from staff's professional opinion. I think there's a huge opportunity here to allow our staff to focus on, again, making sure developments are the type of developments they want, rather than preparing reports for council. Other comments? Okay.
I'm just, one question, and this has no reflection on you, okay? The 100,000 signature with the mayor, can you go back to that, please? I just need to clear that.
The one with the mayor was unlimited.
Oh.
The mayor but with the corporate officer.
Without the council having any knowledge of unlimited.
Oh, no, council has not. Those would apply more to contracts once they're awarded, and right now the mayor and the corporate officer would sign for the lagoon works, for example, when you engage the services, but it would be in the financial plan, yes.
When it's already
absolutely.
approved. Okay,
Absolutely.
that
Yes.
had me worried there because,
Yeah.
let's go shopping. No. Because yeah, okay, if it's already there and that's what that
Yes.
is, okay.
And that would
because-
be more employment contracts as well as another example of that.
But that needs
Yeah.
to be really clear because you can always have a mayor that would have some
Correct.
fun. Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
Thank you. Twyla, do you need any specific direction from council today?
Well, I think, it wouldn't be from council, but members of the committee, I think that was, what we could do, it'd be nice to start working on this bylaw and bringing it forward for further consideration. It was to go in tandem with the procurement policy. So I think I'm hearing there's members of the committee that would still like to have some conversation around the procurement policy as well. And we bring these forward hand in hand, or?
Personally, I would be comfortable with policy being brought forward to council if staff thinks there, based on the conversation today, there's any amendments to be made. And I think at a council meeting, we'll probably go in more detail to some of the specific lines, and there could be changes, but I think there's support from what I'm hearing to continue this process.
Okay, and then as far as the delegation of authority, would you like to see the titles that I introduced, kind of a all-capturing document, and it could be presented for first reading, and you just take it and either say yes, leave in, or take out, or amend, or we could propose that. And perhaps it would make sense that we wait for Bill 26, because that is where you will get the authority to delegate the DVPs. Because I think we're hearing, it's not, yeah, I looked it up today with Bill 26. So I think what we're hearing is there's a lot of appetite to have some land use planning practices delegated.
Yeah, I think that definitely sums it up, and I would say especially following our OCP, being rewritten and there being a very clear picture. I know this wouldn't be for, rezoning specifically, but I think following our OCP being completed, there will be a very clear picture of how we're trying to move forward as a community, and I think that will provide clearer direction for staff through those delegations as well. So, if I'm understanding correctly, this will come back to a council meeting for first reading, possibly with changes, possibly not, and then council can pull back specifics if they would like to and have more conversation about it through that process.
Yes, and if members of the committee would like to make that as a recommendation, that would be great.
So moved.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. Any final comments?
Just one. No, I'll wait to see the right, you bringing it back. I'll wait.
Okay, then with that, on the motion, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay, on to correspondence. We have 2 items of correspondence today. Twyla, do you want to give a summary of them?
Yes, thank you. And I just want to comment as well, we did receive late submissions from Mr. Smith and Mr. Fraser, very close to 4 o'clock. I think we may have not clarified really clearly that we are not inviting questions in real time since we return to in-person council meetings. So just to comment on that now, and just to make note that those 2 items of correspondence will appear on council's February 28th regular council agenda under correspondence summary, and they were related to the financial planning discussions, so they will find its way on our ongoing Q&A summary as well. And then correspondence today are 2 from Leslie Valerius, one regarding Local Government Awareness Week, and the other regarding the city's community investment program. And then the late item correspondence from George Priest, and his comments were related to road markings and services throughout the municipality.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments on those items of correspondence from council? Councillor Corbeil.
Thank you. And thank you, Leslie. You actually forced me to look this up. Little did I know that May 19th is Asset Management Awareness, so it's just one crazy week of excitement. But the one thing that I did pick up out of that is it's also to encourage participation in municipal government. And I think that's important, that, you know, it's easy to sit on your computer and complain about everything, but I'd like to see a lot of people that do that, get involved and come to meetings and make their voice heard this way. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and I'm not sure if staff have any comments on what we could do for Local Government Awareness Week. Like, do we normally promote it on social media or anything like that?
I don't recall the city taking any specific steps during my time here. Now, to be fair, I haven't been here that long, but we could certainly work with our communications department to bring awareness to the week.
Thank you. And to Councillor Corbeil's comment, I think even at the very basic level of letting people know, you know, when you come to a council meeting, you come in the side door. Anyone is welcome, things like that. I think the general public, I know I didn't, you know, until shortly before I ran for council, the general public doesn't have comfort, I think, in coming and engaging in this process because they don't know how. And we hear that, for instance, at our recent meeting, somebody came in and right before the meeting, I was talking with her a little bit, and she said, is it okay if I leave after what I'm here to hear? Because she was here for a specific topic and then wanted to leave after and wasn't sure if that was okay or not. And I think when people don't engage with this process on a regular basis, they just don't have that comfort in knowing how local government works and how to get engaged. So yeah, I think even some really basic information, maybe like we've done some really effective videos in the past about specific topics through our communications department, and could be an opportunity for some basic videos about council meetings, how to engage, when they are, you know, how to attend and all of that. Councillor Solda.
Madam Mayor, just to go to Leslie's letter here about the community investment program. Excuse me, in the past, it used to be a lot higher. It has come down, we know that. And maybe we can, it bothers me because I know during COVID, a lot of organizations have closed. A lot of organizations are having financial problems and stuff like that. Maybe we could talk about that, how the community investment program actually works, just so, Leslie, you have some information on that. I don't know if we want to give her some information on that particular program.
Yeah, thank you. And Andrew, I'm not sure if you're able to comment. Has what we budgeted actually come down, or is just the utilization of it from the community down over the last couple of years?
Thank you, Chair Minion. So with the CIP, I was just looking back at the past few years, and we do roll forward what we don't use. And that comes in a request from the Director of Parks and Heritage. So just looking at that, I mean, we budget the same every year, but those amounts might differ depending on what is applied for and what we have available. So for 2022, we actually have about $69,000 available for CIP. So, you know, Director Thorpe has asked for that funding to be rolled forward.
Thank you, that's helpful. And we know that we've had lower utilization over the last couple of years with fewer community events happening. So good to hear that those funds are being rolled forward, and hopefully it will just be a crazy year of events starting with Local Government Week. Councillor Corbeil.
I wonder if this isn't indicative of even a bigger problem, which is a lack of volunteerism. You know, we're seeing less and less groups applying for funding. Like, for example, you know, when I was a kid, I played for the Elks and the Gyros in soccer. Both of those clubs are long gone, and we're seeing less and less groups that do good things for the community. We see the volunteers aging and aging out in some cases. So, you know, I think there's a bigger question here. How do we get people volunteering and helping, you know, enhance the community?
Thank you, Councillor Solda.
That's a really hard one. I mean, years ago, there used to be a volunteer society who looked after, if you needed volunteers, you make the call and they would get you volunteers, but that left. But I just know that like the cadet program is no longer here because of volunteers. They couldn't find volunteers. I know a group who had to mortgage their building so they can keep going because they still had to pay for the lights and everything during COVID, and they had no money. They had nothing happening because of COVID. So they had to put a mortgage on for a building that had nothing. And it's a shame that they have to do that. And it's a good thing that we do have some surplus money. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just echo the comments around volunteers, and also just want to add that I think as a younger person in the community myself, I often have people say to me, well, like, why isn't your generation volunteering? And I think that we have to take a very serious look at every time we make that comment, because my generation isn't volunteering because now the average family has 2 working parents instead of 1 working parent. And times have changed a lot, and the ability to contribute through volunteerism has changed as well. That said, I think there's an opportunity for some of our groups to engage young people in volunteering in new ways rather than just trying to get young people to volunteer in the same way their parents did. So that's a much bigger conversation and not for council to sort out, but I know I hear that a lot, that there's no people in their 30s volunteering, and that's certainly not true. But not volunteering, I think the important distinction is we're not volunteering in the same groups that our parents did. We're not volunteering in the same ways that our parents did. It's not necessarily that we're not volunteering. So yeah, volunteering has changed, and with it as well, certainly people's ability to volunteer has changed. So bigger conversation, but one I'd love to have with Councillor Corbeil. I'm not going to be the head of the Elks Club. Okay, we'll move on to new business, which there is none on the agenda, so we'll go to public input and question period. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask questions today? I don't have a question. Come on forward, Leslie.
Hi, Leslie Valerius, Port Alberni. Do you need any other information? Okay. Just in regards to Local Government Awareness Week, it's not to bring awareness to council, but awareness to what our city has accomplished. So if we have a capital project and it was successful, let's showcase it. So it's all about showcasing what you've done as a council for our community. So that's basically what that is. And community investment program, yeah, we need volunteers. But there are a lot of groups out there that I don't even think know about the SIP program. Yeah. So it's getting that information out there, whether it's reported in the paper, that what you can apply for, and maybe we'll get them out of the woodwork. And then you'll know more about the volunteers in our community.
Sure.
That's it.
Thank you, Leslie. Would any other members of the public like to ask a question? Okay. Then would somebody like to move adjournment? Moved by Councillor Solda, seconded by Councillor Poon. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.